Oh, hey, this week we welcome Davi Ottenheimer, product strategist at MongoDB. In our second feature interview, we welcome Chris Spain, counselor at Mandiant's Red Team. In the security news for this week, the evolution of the penetration test, the SIM hijackers, thousands of mega logins are dumped, Facebook refuses to remove fake news, the Russians allegedly hacked the DNC and mined Bitcoin, go figure, and a very inappropriate thing that happened in a kid's video game. All that and more on to this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Welcome. Did Larry have an introduction? Hi, everyone. This is Paul Asadorian. I guess I'm introducing...
Apparently, I no longer do. Wow, and I look short.
So, I accidentally landed in New England and stumbled my way to the G-Unit studio.
That's pretty much how I envisioned it happening, Jeff. Carlos, save the show, please.
Yes, somebody's got to do it.
You cannot be saved.
Well, it's good to have you back, Carlos. Jeff, welcome. Nice to have you in studio.
It's great to be here, Paul. Try to stay awake for the whole episode.
Yes. We've been in studio dropping his phone incessantly. Welcome, Chad.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com.
I can't see the screen. I'm facing this way, and the screen's over there. If Burgundy can't read the monitor. Slicker than a black plastic trash bag full of lube and rabid weasels. It's Paul.
That was literally, Doug maybe had 10 seconds to prepare that. And that's, you just never cease to amaze me,
It's a mess in here.
I believe, you don't have to tell me, Doug. I'm fully aware
I was thinking about it before I even said that. So I was like driving over here going,
yeah, what if you got a trash bag?
Shake it up a little.
Oh, my God.
Dump in a bottle of Perrier. It's called a drink.
Oh, my.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul Security Weekly. This is, in fact, episode 568. It is July 19th, 2018. We're in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. And I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. In studio, sitting across from me, is Mr. Doug White, Dr. Doug White.
Yeah.
A professor.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
You play one in my university.
Yeah. I keep telling them that, and they keep listening.
And you are the director of cybersecurity programs for Roger Williams
I'm
University.
the director of, something like that.
I had one of my neighbors actually asked me if I would recommend some colleges that she could attend to learn about cybersecurity and do a degree program. So I'm going to send her. No, I'm not going to send her your way.
Is she cute?
I'm going to definitely send them to another school. To my left, Mr. Patrick Laverty is here with us.
It's awesome to be here. And just like how you have not Kevin, can I be like not professor?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not Kevin is reserved for Kevin. There's a
not doctor.
A long.
Can I be not doctor?
You can be not doctor. Sure.
Okay, I would be not doctor.
Dr. Patrick Laverty is here with us, and you are a senior penetration tester?
No, I'm not senior. I'm just regular.
Just regular.
Just regular. Consultant. I think
he prefers regular penetration.
That's right.
Regular senior penetration.
Yeah, it has nothing to do.
You take your Metamucil every morning, so therefore you're regular.
Try to stay
regular
about
penetration.
Regular as we can. Yeah,
that's great. Fiber helps.
Oh yeah.
On the lines via Skype, Mr. Jason Wood is here with us. Jason, welcome. Jason's from Paladin Security, although I really love the time that I said Jason Paladin from Wood Security, but no, it's Jason Wood from Paladin Security. Jason, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. And Yeah, every so often I get emails from you guys to Jason Paladin.
Yes. Funny how that works. Once it's been said on the internet, it's tough to take it back. Mr. Jack Daniel is here with us. What's going on, Jack?
Hello. Good
With
to
a
be back with
tapestry.
you. Yeah.
Jack, your name comes up a lot around here in the studio. Well, mostly good, I suppose.
But, Facebook status updates and other things I know provide you with the entertainment.
I said all those jokes to myself. I respect you, Jack, on Facebook. Anyhow.
Yeah,
Oh boy. Before we get into it, please go fill out our 2018 listener survey by going to securityweekly.com/survey. It helps us understand our listeners so we can provide the best programming for you. Also partner with the best companies that we feel meet your needs. So please go fill out that survey. It is tremendously useful for us to continue to distribute all of our podcasts and media for free on the internet. So by taking that quick 5-10 minute survey, it ensures that we'll be around for a really long time.
I'm doing
Of course,
it right
if you
now.
don't want that, don't fill out the survey then. That's okay.
I'm going to fill it out right now.
Thank you, Patrick. So let me introduce our first guest, Davi Ottenheimer. He is the president of Flying Penguin, has more than 20 years of experience managing global security operations. He currently works today for MongoDB. Davi, welcome to the program.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Davi, thank you for joining us this evening. How did you get your start in information security?
Ooh. Well, I think it was just a natural fit because I was doing sort of security-related stuff before the industry really existed. So in the, I guess you could say the early 90s, late 80s, I was just really curious about how security fit in terms of everything, the entire world. And when computers just came in front of me, it went that direction naturally. So by 94, 95, I was tackling whatever security problem I could find within the IT context. That's
awesome. And then you were heavily involved in various roles in basically cloud and virtualization. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Okay, I think that, being naturally curious and being involved in security from the start, even way back into when I was a kid, led me right into virtualization when I was working at some big financial processing company. There was an opportunity, we had an 8-way server, I remember very vividly. We were given unlimited access to this 8-way server, and they were like, what can you do with it? And back then, this would have been 97, I think, or 98, and they said, what are you going to do with 8 CPUs to test it? So I grabbed VMware, it must have been 99, I guess, when VMware was beta, and I started trying to see how many virtual machines I could launch and then push over X Windows to remote clients. So just for perspective, I could install Red Hat then, again, this is 1999, in about 30 seconds on the system. Operating system, everything. Fiber drives, it was just an amazing system. Today we talk about cores and stuff, but this is actually physically 8 CPUs. And so then I tried to start pushing virtual machines, and I got to about 6, and the system fell over. 7. So that was really my start, I guess, in sort of building my own cloud without really realizing it. And so from 99 to about 2009, I was working with virtualization and cloud just wherever I could. And then VMware kind of came to me and said, we want you to work on some stuff for us, which turned into vCloud. And so by 2012, after being on the inside of VMware and working on the creation of their cloud offering, I published a book about cloud security based on some of the work we did there. And then I was working at EMC, where I was basically going around the world building clouds as quickly as we could. We were launching up to 40,000 systems within 24 hours. So that was pretty exciting. It's kind of the trajectory of my cloud career, I guess. And now I'm working on the data that sits on top of it, so that's even more exciting.
Yeah, so if it's more exciting, we want to hear about that. So you made the transition basically from the cloud world into the MongoDB, although I'm sure there's a lot of still overlap there, right? But what prompted your decision to decide to go work with MongoDB?
Well, there are a couple things. I mean, one, they came to me and they said they were looking for people, and I was happy to help. I'm always trying to make connections between need, pain, and experts. And as I went around and I asked people like, who wants to help with these big data problems, people kept pointing back to me and saying, I thought you were the guy that was supposed to be fixing these things. And that felt weird. So I just thought, well, maybe I should do it. And then as I started to look at the problem, it made perfect sense. I mean, I was working on a book after my first book about cloud security. I was working on a book about big data security. And boy, it's just transformed, as I've been writing it into deeper and deeper topic. I've spent almost 5 years or 6 years now on it. And so MongoDB seemed like a great place to really explore all the aspects I could of the big data problem set. I really worked on Hadoop. I'd focused on that initially because that's what we were throwing on top of our biggest cloud platforms to do, like massive parallel processing. But MongoDB gave an opportunity to do something that was even more interesting, which is go directly into the developer community, which I have not done a lot of. So now I'm touching all different forms of development practices that go towards very large data sets. So that's just super exciting. I decided to join to help out with that.
And you're very vocal about issues related to privacy and big data, correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I'm not on Facebook, per the earlier discussion. And I think I've been very vocal about how disappointed I think our industry should be with the way that Facebook has handled their security. I mean, I've been a vocal critic, and I continue to be, about the accountability of security officers and security professionals who are sitting on top of what I consider integrity breaches and not doing anything about it, and then trying to claim afterwards that they tried and people should have listened to them. I feel like it's just a big black eye on our industry right now. And since 2014, as I was researching the book and working on this topic, I was a critic of Uber, of Facebook, of Tesla, and very specific examples I was trying to give people of how, if we don't, as an industry, as security professionals, having over 20 years in this, it just seems so obvious to me, if we don't take a firm position on how to secure these types of products, platforms, companies, then we're ceding control. We need to be much more, I think, proactive about what we would expect from a secure product. Facebook, to me, has some pretty obvious changes they could have made in 2014, and they went the opposite route, I believe, and that's where they ended up in this terrible place. Tesla killed a couple people they could have avoided.
Certainly, and I definitely want to talk about that. But so when I talk with people about privacy issues as it relates to some of the bigger properties you're talking about, such as Facebook, I think a lot of folks kind of like gloss over the fact that, well, if they want to target some advertisements to me, like what harm is that? And the shining example, and since you brought up Facebook, we'll use that as an example, right? When I go on Amazon and I'm browsing for stuff, when I come back to Facebook, I'm being targeted with ads for those specific products. And I think most people find that a little creepy, but they're not sounding the alarms. Well, why is that? And what are some of the concerns with even just that level of, that essentially using big data to make those connections?
Well, it's an interesting topic for us because it blends into the social sciences and even to psychology, anthropology, and so it becomes sort of a discomfort for people who are used to dealing with mathematics or computers specifically, where you can say, here are the rules. It's like gravity. We sort of establish what things should do, and then we decide whether they have done them appropriately or not, and that becomes much more murky when we get into sort of human behavior science. So I mean, for example, malware is going to affect or modify code, and then the machine is going to run differently than was expected. When you take that to the extreme, out to artificial intelligence or machine learning, you can influence the outcome in ways that are detrimental, and so you have to have controls in place on the path of making those decisions so that you don't get into a position where you're doing the wrong thing. Or, I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. Is it's a much more complex space, but it's the same thing. So on a binary level, you're basically making a bad choice. On a much more complex gray level, you have, I wouldn't say perfect knowledge, but you have this idea of what's going to happen, and you choose anyway to go down that route. And so why did you make that choice? And that takes us into philosophy, ethics of making poor decisions. So being bombarded by ads that change your decision and force you to go down a route that you wouldn't normally go to is, in essence, linked to malware. It's linked to the idea that you're affecting people's ability to do things, process things in a way that they should without interference, unauthorized interference for that matter. They don't know that they're signing up for this type of information.
But isn't that what marketing's been doing for 50 years? I mean, marketing, whether it was done with Facebook or it was done on a television set or in a magazine or a newspaper, I mean, wasn't that always what they were doing, convincing you of things that appealed to you with people that looked like you for products that you really didn't need? I mean, I'm not defending it. But I mean, it really is just, I mean, it's the same marketing stuff we've been seeing since forever.
It is marketing, and so you could also, it's the economics, we talk about social engineering, it's the economics of behavior. People call it nudge economics now. And so there's a lot of study. I guess I should go back a little bit. My background was in actually some of this stuff, and I did study, for example, in conflict, how you would win the hearts and minds of people, dropping leaflets, or I even wrote a blog post once about how a very small group of invaders into Ethiopia were able to overcome massive odds by using some psychological methods. Ord Wingate is probably one of the seminal studies in this area, as he was able to use just a few thousand Sudanese soldiers to defeat hundreds of thousands of Italians. So it's not just marketing, it's really manipulating others. But on the topic of marketing, I think it's interesting to look at, I did a presentation recently where I exposed basically Ronald Reagan, for example, for lowering the level of controls we had around marketing. So we pushed, for example, marketing to children, and even below the level of what the providers themselves considered safe controls. He removed safety in a way that, if we're in a cloud context, you'd say even the cloud providers are being told by the Reagan administration to remove malware protection because they think it's unnecessary and the market will solve for itself. And so that transition was just one of several things that happened in the United States that actually made things much worse for us in terms of information dissemination. The Reagan administration debacle was followed up by the Gingrich moves under the Clinton administration, which further deregulated essentially how you would disseminate that information. So now we have much larger entities providing information with much less regulation. And so, as we know, if we take off controls when there's known harm, then it's not really just about marketing per se, but it's about whether you recognize that there's harm that as an outcome that's very highly likely or probable, and restricting that type of advertising. So we do that. We restrict certain types of advertising, but we've done a lot less of it since the Reagan administration.
And isn't that one of the big naiveties, though? I mean, the big naivety always to me was that the assumption in this free market thing is that companies do what's best for the consumers, but the reality is companies do what's best for the companies. So when we deregulate them and they say, well, we could sell cigarettes to children, and you go, well, that's I guess they'll do what's right, and people will turn away from the company, but they don't. They like those profits to come rolling in. So I agree with you.
And to what you're saying about how the companies are going to do what's best for themselves, is there any better example than political advertising? They're certainly not going to do what's best for the people. They're going to do what's best for themselves.
And they've been lying a lot lately and just making things up and telling you whatever you wanted to hear to get you to vote. And that's become the standard in marketing. All that stuff is just like, the only thing that matters is getting them to vote. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's just you got to get them to go pull that lever. It doesn't matter what we tell them or how we tell them or whether it's true. Just you got to get them to do it. And that is a danger in like big data and things like that, because again, that assumption that the developers are not malevolent, that the marketers are not malevolent, and that the company is going to do what's best for all of society, when in reality they're going to do what's best for the bottom line.
Davi, is regulation one of the better ways to solve the problem of violations of people's privacy?
It certainly is, and regulation comes in lots of different forms. I think people overemphasize government. Government regulation, in my sense, from all the work I've ever done, has been that it's like the last. When government gets involved, it's because people have bound together and they've basically formed a government in order to say, look, we've tried every other possible method, so you've really screwed it up so much, now we're going to have to use the last vestige of control we have. There's other regulation that comes earlier, which industry self-regulates, organizations self-regulate, even groups, whatever size, regulate. So there's shaming, there's, all sorts of penalties that people put on one another when they think people shouldn't do. Those are all regulation methods. So GDPR is a good example of this. I mean, I feel like a human right to privacy makes sense. And so the question is, what authority is going to decide what privacy means, and then who's going to enforce it? And so regulation is, by nature, it's just how humans operate. Probably one of the better ways to say, this is what we mean, and this is how you're going to have to comply. And then it gets more and more technical as you move on, because people become more and more familiar from attempting. Maybe a better way of saying that is, we innovate around controls and we make better security decisions when we're forced to understand a standard that we should adhere to. If we want to go to the moon, we have to build rockets, but if no one says go to the moon, we just don't bother.
Davi, how do we balance the having more privacy and allowing it to lead us to where those that are going to do bad things are able to hide behind that privacy. And I think certainly we've seen that with Tor and blockchain technologies. And sure, they do allow for some kind of privacy, but they're also being used to fuel some of the underground economy. How do we balance that when we have these regulations?
That's one of the hardest problems. I mean, really, I'd like to present this as the battle of knowledge versus privacy. And I think when you frame it that way, you say, if I could solve cancer, would you give me your information? And a lot of groups, China and India in particular, would say yes. Yeah. If you have a social good, then they tend to sacrifice their privacy. That doesn't actually work as well in the United States and Sweden and some other countries. So these have been studies that Microsoft actually did some really interesting stuff, and they testified in front of the US government about these research results. So in the US and Sweden, which are on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's more like you have to say, I'm not going to gain knowledge that I can use to save the world, but I can give you a chocolate bar. Would you give me your privacy? And then people say, yeah. If I get something personal, which may be a secret, maybe knowledge, like if I tell you something about a famous celebrity, would you give me your privacy? And people say, oh, sure, yeah, I'll do that. So yeah, with competing knowledge versus privacy, then we basically have a spectrum that I have a slide that I try to show people that's basically 5 degrees in which we move up with less and less privacy towards knowledge until we get to about level 4. And then there's this trough of disillusionment that we fall into. And by the time we try to get to level 5, where we have sort of perfect knowledge and no privacy, people react in such a strong way, we start over at level 1, which is basically binary. Things are either good or bad. And that's a terrible level to operate at. It's much better to mature to where we can think this is getting better, or these are kinder, better things. So whenever somebody says, like, this isn't working perfectly, we need to do a reset, they're basically taking us on a 5-step level. They might be at level 2 or 3 and going to 1, not even trying to get to level 4.
Do you think, though, that people are just now learning, though? I mean, that it's always an evolutionary process. So, yeah, I agree with you. But maybe as people don't really understand what they're being asked to give up, or that they're even giving up anything at all. They just want the chocolate bar. They just want the celebrity photo. So maybe over time, as they learn, they will become more discerning about what components they're willing to sacrifice and not sacrifice, and when to sacrifice and when not to sacrifice.
Well, this is why it's like it really gets into philosophy. David Hume, one of my favorite philosophers of all time, he sort of put it as you're never going to open a door if you have to figure out how every doorknob works. You're going to sort of like take for granted that you've opened a few before, and you're going to turn it or you're going to push it. And so a lot of this is about shortcuts. A lot of it is about people wanting to go on with their lives. And so they don't actually want lots of knowledge, and they don't want to get lots of things, but they want things they like, and they want to not have to know things that other people tell them are true. They'll just go ahead and go with it because it saves them a lot of time. So efficiencies are where we get into trouble. And I found this more and more and this is where security really has to play a part. A lot of companies that are promising you machine learning, AI, all sorts of insights, are using shortcuts like you wouldn't believe. There are all sorts of cheats, which should be familiar to anyone who's worked in security. Like when you try to go in and say, like, show me your patch level, show me your controls, show me the roles that you've created. People do as little as possible to get away with it. And so, for example, when the Tesla was driving down the road, it lacked a lot of knowledge. And it used a bunch of cheats, and that got it in trouble, and it killed its driver. And the Uber is the same thing. They removed a lot of the systems that would have given it better knowledge because they thought it would get them faster to market, and also allow them to operate safely without knowledge. So they weren't trying to protect privacy in that sense. They're actually going for performance gains, but it's sort of the same thing, right? You have a value, and you think that less knowledge is okay.
Jack or Jason on the lines via Skype, did you have questions, certainly privacy related for Davi?
I think
I did not.
Digging in pretty well. It is a trade-off, and the convenience factor is a challenge. I mean, the first big revelation I had with internal struggle was years ago. I remember being in San Francisco and came back from a conference. I'm in my hotel room with my new Android phone, and I looked at it, and the phone just had one of those messages that comes up on the home screen to tell you stuff, and it told me one of my favorite artists was playing at a club nearby. Junior Brown was playing at Yoshi's, but I hadn't searched for Junior Brown on that phone, but it was a Google device, so it had my search history, and it was a phone, so it knew where I was. And so I remember just picking the phone up. It buzzed. I looked at it. I picked the phone up. I threw it across the hotel room, cursed at Google, walked over, picked it up, and punched the button, and called Yoshi's and bought a ticket and walked over and saw the show. And I think that story says a lot about the challenges, opportunities, and trade-offs we make. In the end, I was still annoyed and went to see a great show I would have missed otherwise, even though I was less than a mile from where Junior Brown was playing.
Well, and I think in some research that I've been doing lately, Davi, I think that what Jack was referencing and what you were referencing earlier was that if you give something to someone, they're willing to give you their information, and it's somewhat of an exchange. And I think there's no better example as Black Hat is upon us, and RSA was earlier this year. When people visit the booths of security vendors, they're like, oh, I want one of those tchotchkes or swag things. And they're like, oh, I need to scan your badge first. And later on, the annoyance factor comes like when you might get an email from them or a phone call from their sales team. And I think that's, gone a little sideways because we're kind of annoyed by that, right? It's not very targeted. You weren't there necessarily to learn about that company. You were there just to get a piece of swag. And I think that's bad for both parties, Davi. So how do we make this right for both parties, for those of us that actually are interested in purchasing things?
Well, that's why GDPR is interesting, because when they say it's a human right to privacy, they put control back in the hands of the person whose data it is. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the primary issues we have is, like, Facebook, a perfect example of this. People are giving away so much because they think they might be getting something out of it, but what they don't realize is how much they're giving away. It's like negotiating with the devil. You're basically saying, I'm going to go down to the crossroads and I want to learn how to play, and they're going to take everything away from you, and you're going to have like no control left. They're literally going to change your future, change your decisions. You're essentially going into a cult-like relationship where you're following a leader who's making you make decisions that may even be suicidal. So the idea that you have a right to privacy puts all that control back in your hands, where you say, okay, I want to check out. I want to get out of this cult. I want to leave the following, stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and they give you the ability to erase, your presence on that platform. So regulation is very powerful in the sense that it can say you have a right to leave the cult of Facebook. So, and I think when people see it that way, they'll begin to realize that, forsaking that religious leader, Zuckerberg, who's trying to keep them always eyeballs on, as much as he can. That's the change I'd like to see. That's where I'd like to see. I mean, I can talk about it in terms of Uber and Tesla as well, but I think Facebook is the most compelling example of an evil organization where security professionals were complicit in doing harm to people.
We also started talking about the ethics of computing, and I like that Doug's here because I don't know if you have a course in your university program for ethics for computer science.
It's just very brief. It just says don't do it.
Right. But when we talk about these privacy things, there are those of us out there that are applying security and maybe even developing some of these systems. When does ethics come into play, and how do we teach that effectively in the schools? Because I feel like we're dropping the ball, as you've already evidenced in some of your comments already.
Well, it's interesting. It's different in different places. So I feel like some people treat computer science as an engineering discipline, and I found certain countries where you're not allowed to become an engineer, chemical, mechanical, otherwise, unless you go through an ethics course. You can't build a bridge that will fall down. But it's not always that way. People look at software in particular as just something that you release, and a market will determine whether it's safe or not. And in the United States, the story is cryptographers will only sign an ethics statement 50% of the time, like an intent to do no harm. And that's shocking when you think about what cryptography is really supposed to do. It's supposed to make things safer. And if people aren't signing an ethics form, then where's their foundation? And the reason they don't sign it, apparently, is because they say that they're not experts in this, which is troubling, because you don't have to become an expert in ethics to sort of have a foundation that tells you, right, wrong isn't something that requires a lifetime of study. It's something that comes a little more easily. So I teach ethics in a computer science graduate course. I have done for about 5 years, precisely for this reason. I just got involved and decided to find out why it was so hard or what's the problem. And I teach it privately too, in corporations, organizations around the world, all the time. And there's always one person, no matter where I teach or who I am teaching with, there's always one person in the class that says, what if I was God, though? What if I had absolute perfect knowledge? Would that be okay? Then I could just decide whatever I want, and I wouldn't have to listen to others. And it's bizarre to me. I don't think this is a problem that's going to be easy to solve, ever. But heartening part of this is the rest of the class turns on them and they say, no, you can't be perfect. Like at some point you'll be wrong, and you have to recognize that if you make a mistake, there has to be corrective action.
I mean, we have an ethics course, and I always go back and forth in this, so I have a great opportunity for me to ask you my question, which is, do you think you can teach ethics to people? I mean, do people become ethical because they took a course, or do unethical people take the course, sign the form, and saying, yes, now I'm ethical, and yes, I will never commit an ethics breach because they're unethical to start with? I mean, I have some problems with that. I mean, I think the courses are valuable, but they almost, when I look at them, they're almost like philosophy courses. It's about discussing ethics rather than about, like, here's what you need to do. You know, so it's a great chance for me to ask you that question.
Oh yeah, I definitely think you can teach people ethics, and I definitely think you can turn people on certain issues. I've been a competitive debater for a long, long time, and I know when I'm losing an argument, when I'm winning an argument, and it's really hard sometimes in computer science courses because I feel like I'm losing these arguments with people who I'm not going to get them to turn the corner. But I teach in Austria, for example, and I've had some students who they go after me because they like to fight, and they will say, you know, you're from the United States, you're NSA. You know, and I just feel like they don't have a good ethical foundation they have a lot of good arguments, but they don't have a good ethical foundation. And by the end of the class, it's about 16 hours, they actually thank me. They say, I think of things differently now. And maybe to put it in a better perspective, I work with a lot of developers now where I build threat models. And it's sort of like asking, can you teach someone security? Can you teach someone to think about threats? Can you teach someone to think about harm, impact, right? Can you decompose an application? Can you walk through how it works, where the assets are, and look for things that could get hurt if you don't protect against that? You absolutely can teach these concepts, whether it be what an asset is, what value is, what a control is, right? Vulnerabilities, impact. So yeah, I've had great success. But like I say, there's always one person I just can't get through to, and they just say, you know, I think I might have the accuracy of God, so I don't want anyone else telling me what's right and wrong.
What, narcissists in computer science? Say it isn't so.
Right?
It happens.
So, W, what are some of your techniques for allowing people? And I think it's teaching people ethics is you have to allow them to come to more ethical conclusions on their own. So, what are some of your techniques to essentially social engineer them into coming to some of those conclusions and getting them to think differently?
Well, I've had to modify how I've done this over the years. I mean, initially I tried a very technical approach where I would just use systems themselves and show people what's good and bad and use an example. That didn't seem to be very successful because people just saw it as more programming, essentially. So then I switched to an entirely philosophical approach where I just took them through the history of ethics, which I enjoyed greatly because I got to talk about, from Aristotle to Wollstonecraft, and sort of everybody in between, or Nietzsche, what they were talking about. And that flopped completely because people said, this is philosophy, we hate it. So then I blended the two in the next 3 years, and I basically took people through examples of technology that failed, and then I mapped it to ancient ethical principles. So ethical models, essentially, of what Hume was talking about, as I mentioned before. Wollstonecraft is a good example. She was very she was very, in the 1700s, in the 1780s, she was writing about how slavery should end and how women should have rights. And she had just built such a good ethical model for how you can figure out what to do in society. And I find most people have never heard of her. They've heard of other people at that time, like Kant, but not her. And same with Hume, actually. I found a lot of people have heard of Rousseau, but not Hume. So it's interesting to me also that some of the okay philosophers get a lot of airtime, but some of the lesser known ones don't. So for example, when I just gave a presentation to a huge global organization, 300 plus people, maybe even 500 on the call in the presentation. And I start talking about Wollstonecraft, and people are like, who? And so that sort of opens people's minds because it's new knowledge, it's things they haven't heard about, they don't know what this person is or what they're saying. And then I map it to, okay, and this is why the Tesla car killed the driver, actively made a decision to do the worst possible thing and murder the person in the car, which is a different way of presenting a reality than what they'd heard. And so I think that's kind of the methods I use, sort of to use new knowledge and to map it to actual real world events and show people how code itself, how you write the code, how you make the product, how you release the code, responsibility down the road, how that plays out. But even so, I found people that will disagree with me, and I map out how harm is done, and they say so, and I say, but we built this framework that says harm shouldn't be done. They're like, yeah, but I don't care. And so, as I said, every so often I feel like I can't get through, but that's the goal, is to get through to everybody else who is ready to listen, and maybe that other person will come back later.
Davi, are you presenting anywhere else this year?
I am. I think I just got asked to present. I'll be at Black Hat for a little panel, which I usually don't do presentations at Black Hat anymore. Not my vibe. But where else? I'll be in Europe for MongoDB World. That's a good presentation.
There you go. Now,
Yeah.
are you speaking at MongoDB World?
I am. Yep. I'll probably be speaking about privacy rights and big data, as a matter of fact. Hot topic.
Awesome. That's really cool. So, Davi, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yes. Ready.
All right. Question 1, 3 words to describe yourself.
Wow, these are hard questions.
These are easy. There's no right or wrong answer.
Curious. Now that I'm looking at the Skype thing, hairy. Guess I forgot to shave this morning.
You and
tenacious.
me both.
Tenacious. People say that about me all the time. Tenacious.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Man, these are hard. What would the title be? For some reason, rain comes to mind.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Don't say hair.
No, I was going to say sunflowers.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I have no idea what that means.
It's popular in Europe.
Yeah.
You'll see.
I try to avoid going first.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Oh my God, I don't know any celebrities.
They can be philosophers.
Yes, there you go.
I mean, Wollstonecraft, unbelievable philosopher. Absolutely top choice for a parent. I have to choose 2 parents?
Yeah, and the gender does not matter either.
We're open-minded.
We don't judge.
No.
I talk about Hume so much.
Inanimate objects are okay.
Sure.
Oh, I know. Hammerscold.
Hammerscold. We're going to have to go Google search these now.
UN Secretary General.
People named Dog. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just love to talk to him. I mean, I don't know. It's just the opportunity to have that sort of person to be able to talk to would be amazing.
I just like to talk to somebody named Hammerscold.
Yeah, exactly. Davi, that's awesome. Thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. It was awesome having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
And with that, we will take a short break, come back, and bring up our next interview. So stay tuned. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences. Demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Introducing the new DigiCert. As the leading provider of high-assurance SSL, TLS, and PKI certificates, DigiCert is all about improving security across the web and IoT. DigiCert is committed to helping customers and partners successfully deploy identity, authentication, and encryption solutions. They'll even help you figure out which certificate you need to secure your web domains, apps, devices, and more. Check out the Cert Wizard tool under the SSL tab on digicert.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Before we dive into our next interview, I want to remind our listeners and viewers that we will be at Black Hat and DEF CON, and at each conference we'll be in the respective pool areas at Mandalay Bay and Caesar's Palace, and we will have our own cabana, bungalow, tent, gazebo, bordello, that's a good one. I'm writing that down. Bordello. We'll be there. We will have some type of structure, and we'll be handing out the Cyber Hero Adventures comic book, which we have a little thing on the inside cover. We want you to come and get those and take those to your friends and family and coworkers, because it's a comic book about how to basically increase your cybersecurity for individuals and maybe those that work for companies. It's an awesome comic book. Gary Berman and Security Weekly have partnered to distribute these at Black Hat and DEF CON. We will also be in the vendor area at DEF CON, as always, as we have been for the past several years. This year, we're going to be selling Hack Naked t-shirts, Security Weekly shot glasses. We've got some really cool, like, knockoff Gunner computer glasses that I think are going to be on sale for like $10, dude. And Gunners are like what, $40 to $70?
More than $10.
More than $10, right? These have the Security Weekly logo on the side. So I think it's nice if you want to test out and see if they work for you. Like, you know, they're $10, so you don't have to make the full commitment. Now, if you've used the cheaper ones, like don't come buy one from us. Gunner usually has a thing there. Like, go buy the nice ones if you really like them. I've done the comparison. The Gunners are a little nicer. They do make the screen easier to read than the $10 ones, but the $10 ones are way better than looking at it without the glasses.
And
so I've done
10% less blindness than last year.
That's yes. They
vastly reduced that.
Vastly
past, yeah.
reduced that. Anyway,
no animals were harmed though. We used humans.
We did. We used all humans in our testing. It was actually me that tested. Anyway, so make sure you do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hope to see everyone out there who is attending. Chris Spain is here with us. He is at Conscious Hacker on Twitter. He is a consultant on Mandiant's Red Team, formerly a penetration tester for major credit card companies and retailers. Chris gave one of the keynotes at Circle City Con and has an open source project that he's going to tell you about tonight. Chris, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's nice to see you in person and have you on the show this evening, Chris. Now, you have a project that is involved. It's called Great SCT, and it's a framework as part of Metasploit to bypass common antivirus and whitelisting solutions. My first question for you, Chris, is how did you come up with this idea? Like, what happened to lead you to be one of the co-creators, right? There are other contributors other than yourself to this project.
It's kind of a long story.
We want to hear it.
We have time.
Yeah, it was a bright, sunny Colorado morning. I had just taken the Creative Red Team training course from Mandiant internally that we typically give at Black Hat. I had learned all the things, thought I was surely prepared for my first Red Team engagement as an active participant. No longer just doing pen testing.
This was like you get hired as a Mandiant Red Teamer. You just finished training. This is your very first pen test that you're doing for a Mandiant client.
Well, very first Red Team for a Mandiant client.
Gotcha.
I had done pen tests for them previously, but very first red team for a Mandiant client.
And the whole point of red team is to be stealthy, not get caught, and really do the adversary simulation.
Yeah, I would say the point of a red team is really to detect the organization's ability to detect and to respond to things, rather than being super stealthy all the time.
Yes.
At least in my own humble opinion.
Important to the story. Continue.
Yeah. So, at the time we were getting ready to do phishing, and if I recall correctly, the email phishing didn't really work out. We did some phone social engineering. We actually did get in. It went as expected. But our beacons died because we were using Cobalt Strike, and the terminology there is beacon versus shell. And, we couldn't exactly figure out why. I was checking the logs for Apache and noticed, a Linux user agent hit our web server, but, they weren't pulling down the HTML application, which was, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of strange. Like, Linux agent probably shouldn't be able to hit this in the first place, so that's the first mistake I made. And then, I see another user agent hit it, and virus total is in it. Shortly after that, our global
so when you upload a malware sample to VirusTotal, it actually executes that malware and had left a log entry in your callback server.
Yes, but the way we do things, it never exposed our true command and control. It exposed the redirector that we were using, which we adjusted from there.
Gotcha.
So yeah, VirusTotal, they were trying to pull down, they didn't pull down the HTML application, and eventually they did with VirusTotal user agent, and then in our global red team chat, Nick Carr from the FireEye Advanced Practices team asked, is anyone doing a red team for X client? Me and the other guy doing it were pretty new to the company. I had been around a little longer, so I stepped up and said, yeah, unfortunately, that's me. And we chatted a bit, and he's like, well, I just burned all your tradecraft. So I'm like, oh, man, this is my first red team as an active participant at Mandiant. Like, things aren't going so well. I was so confident, thought I was prepared. We got in right away, but then we got caught. And so I was in the Denver Mandiant office at the time, and the person that sat across from me at that time was Casey Smith, also known as Sub T on Twitter. And so I let out a big sigh, and I looked forward and I said, Casey, I'm sorry. I just burned all your tradecraft. That was a very hard thing for me to do at the time because I was learning so much from that particular individual, and he was teaching me all about regcirp32 and com scriptlets. And, Casey replied, no, it's Spain. That's okay. Give me like 15, 20 minutes. Let me do some research. Maybe we can come up with something new to use on this engagement for you. I said, okay, well, if you don't mind, can I shoulder surf you and ask questions and see what you're doing? He said, sure, no problem. So I went around my desk and started shoulder surfing Casey. He slowly started to remove components from the com scriptlet, which is essentially an XML file. So he slowly started to remove tags from it to minimize it. It was really close to getting it, and I said, I think you're making a syntactical mistake here. I said, yeah, maybe you're right. Give me 10 minutes to kind of zone out with headphones on. I said, okay, cool, so I left him alone for 10, 15 minutes, came back into the office, and he goes, Spain, you were right. I got it to work. And that's how the minimalist com scriptlet was born for regcirp32, which is in use by a threat actor that FireEye labels APT32. And they're primarily politically motivated, although, I'm not here to talk about APT32 today.
Right, but essentially you uncovered a technique for bypassing protections that both worked for you, and then later found out also the evil attackers in the real world were also using.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't me. It was really a team effort, and I would really give all the credit to Casey Smith, to be honest, since he's the one that actually did it. Sure, I was there. I shoulder surfed. It's how it happens. It's a true story. But really, all credit goes to him. He's the one that does the research.
Casey's awesome too. He's made appearances on the show as well.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
So then what? So then you're like, let's create an open source project and take this to the next level?
Yeah, so I was also working with Chris Trunzer from the Veil framework at the time, and really it was kind of his idea.
You got some really smart friends, Chris.
Well, I would attribute that to joining Mandiant. I just kind of joined them. I was in the right place at the right time. I knew I wanted to work for one of the top InfoSec consulting firms, go back to a security company because I used to work for Spider Labs, and that's the job I enjoyed the most. So I started looking. I won't mention like other companies that I was talking to, but I'll say I didn't align with them as much. And I knew I was going to be working with Chris Trunzer at the time that I joined Mandiant. He's no longer working for Mandiant, however. But I was really excited to work with him and other individuals. And then maybe like a month or two after I had been there, Casey joined the team. And again, Casey is no longer with Mandiant as well. He works for Red Canary now. But I just feel like I was in the right place at the right time. I got kind of lucky. But yeah, so like to answer your question, it was really like, he would probably tell you otherwise, to be honest. But it was all Chris Trunzer's idea to kind of develop a framework for application whitelist bypasses. Because we kind of ran into this issue with clients where they would ask us, how do I test the efficacy of my application whitelist policy? And, how do you answer that question? Because there's nothing really available to do that. You have to be a highly technical person that's staying on top of the research done by folks like Casey and Matt Graber, Matt Nelson. I can name a ton of people there that are doing fantastic work. But it's highly technical research, and not everyone can go in and go ahead and weaponize these payloads immediately and employ different techniques within the research that they've done. So it was one of those things where I had a client ask me that, and I didn't have a good answer for them until I started developing this framework. I mean, now we have things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is not exactly related to application whitelist bypasses, but or like strictly focusing on application whitelisting, but at least it's something out there for a common taxonomy. And so linking that back up with application whitelisting can be beneficial as well. But really, like, I just haven't have a good answer for clients. It was just like, I don't know, keep hiring us, and we'll do it for you. I'm not sure. Like, it's a difficult problem to solve since it's such a highly technical area, and the ability to understand the research requires a certain level of fundamental knowledge to be able to start utilizing it. So it's not like every analyst within every corporation or small business even would be capable of going and taking, Casey or Graber's or some new research that comes out and employing it in a way, utilizing it in a way that'll be beneficial for to audit their application whitelist policy, or to audit, their EDR products capabilities, or maybe just to audit their capability to detect and respond to something.
And so tell us about the Great SCT framework. Like, how is it implemented? What's it written in? How do we start working with it?
So Great Scott, that's how you pronounce it, or how I pronounce it.
Sorry.
Great SCT or Great Scott.
You are the definitive source on how to pronounce that one, since it's partly your product. Project.
I think even in the GitHub README, it might say it's pronounced Great Scott, or maybe I removed that. I don't remember.
I could have very likely missed it. So
yeah, it would be easy to miss. But anyway, it's on GitHub, github.com/greatsct. It's a GitHub organization that you can go to. It's written in Python 3. Specifically, it requires Python 3.6 and above due to some of the invoke obfuscation ports to Python use a specific library, random.choices. I should say a specific method, random.choices within Python 3.6. So Python 3.6 is required. There are some other requirements. Really, how I would describe Great Scott is it's essentially a fork of the Veil framework, written by Chris Strunzer and Will Schroeder Harmjoy. And so I forked Veil, and really the story behind this is, I was working with Chris Strunzer on an internal pen test, and after hours we were hanging out at the hotel bar. And I was showing him how, what I was working on with Great Scott and everything. And this is whenever, this is like the old version of Great Scott, the old framework that I had written with a coworker. And one of the things he noticed that I was running into is I was monkey patching my old coworker's framework all the time. And I didn't really understand or know how his framework worked, because there were literally comments in the framework that said, this code is intentionally obfuscated for intellectual property issues. No, really, why are you laughing? So it was pretty difficult to debug and go through. So he was telling me about how he went through the same thing with Veil, and how Will Schroeder had wrote the original framework, and he didn't really understand how it worked. So with Veil 3.0, he decided he would rewrite the entire framework portion of the tool. And then he was like, well, maybe you should just use Veil's framework. And he started explaining it to me about how there's a conductor that conducts the orchestra and within his framework and all this, and how it's designed. And I was like, yeah, that actually, it's really corny, and I'm going to make fun of you for doing that. But it all makes sense to me, and it's good. So from then, the next weekend, I had gone home, and I think that Saturday or Sunday I forked Veil. I started minimizing, taking out what I didn't need.
I'm sorry, now Chris, for our listeners, what is the purpose of Veil in contrast to the project that you created?
So Veil's purpose is really to bypass antivirus solutions, generate payloads to bypass antivirus solutions. Typically what people use it for, or even what threat actors use it for, are typically for generating backdoors that will evade antivirus on disk. That's what I've seen it used for the most from an operational perspective. So yeah, it's really a tool designed to bypass antivirus and to show that antivirus isn't the end-all be-all, and that you should be auditing your antivirus solutions to know what you can and cannot detect. So it's a similar idea with Great Scott of it's just focused on application whitelisting and the bypasses surrounding default application whitelist policies like AppLocker. AppLocker is really, they call it one rule, like the AppLocker default rule, but it's really 3 rules in one. And that's something that I go over extensively in my talk at Circle City Con. That's recorded on YouTube, and can find it on irongeek.com.
So, Chris, are you trying to emulate the behavior and system calls and such of a whitelisted binary, or are you trying to bypass that whitelisting technology, or is it a combination of both?
I would still really say it's probably the latter, where it's an application whitelist bypass framework, where every single application whitelist bypass that has been discovered by a researcher, the goal is to catch them all. Hence, my talk name, Great Scott, gotta catch them all. So I'm trying to integrate all those into the framework. There's definitely some other efforts that I have in mind, like covering all the various ways or techniques of injecting shellcode, as an example, or providing a way to not only have let's say we want to use QUser APC for shellcode injection, but we want to use create remote thread for process injection. I want to provide that sort of capability. So it's kind of taking things like, if you're familiar with Red Canary's Red Team Atomic testing framework, it's not exactly the same thing. But if you look at some of the payloads that they have in there, like regsurf 32, for example, it's a very basic proof of concept that pops calc.exe, right? And it's great for developing baseline detections. It's a fantastic project. However, like there's nothing that really like comprehensively puts all of that together. You know, these different methods of shellcode injection, like even if, let's say they decided to start putting, I don't think they'll ever do this, but they decided to start putting like shellcode injection in there. You know, those guys are smart enough to know like there's many different ways of doing that, and then there's also process injection that goes along with that, and many different techniques for that. So I think we have very different goals, and I'm really just focused around the application whitelist bypasses and providing as many unique payloads for that specific technique as possible. So if you go and you look at the framework and you look at all the payloads within the framework, you'll see that like I've been going for comprehensive coverage where, you know, like for example, with msbuild.exe, a Microsoft developer utility that compiles C# code essentially from an XML file in memory and executes it. In that case, you know, I have custom interpreter stagers. There's shellcode injection. Now, like a lot of the proof of concepts from researchers that get released, particularly for shellcode injection with these application whitelist bypasses, is in memory, the thread that they're creating is read, write, execute. Now, I know for a fact that many, you know, endpoint defense and readiness products look for read, write, execute in memory, especially with the prevalence of the anti-malware scanning interface. Although it doesn't focus on that, people are focusing, my point is like people are focusing way more on what's happening in memory on the system. And like that's kind of the point of the EDR product, right? To get visibility not only into what's going on disk, but what's in memory. And so when these payloads are read, write, execute, most EDR products will flag that. So for example, most, if not all, of the payloads within the Great Scott framework are read, write, and then re-execute. So nothing in memory is read, write, and execute all at the same time. It's read, write when it needs to be, and it's read, execute when it needs to be. And it doesn't even really need to be read, execute. It could just be execute at the end, and it would be fine. So there's definitely still room for improvement there, right? But it's really just like focusing on the most prevalent techniques that are out there for red teaming and pulling it all into one place in relation to application whitelisting. So I think my tool is also useful for auditing the capabilities of an endpoint defense and readiness products. Definitely you should check out something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework or Red Canary's atomic testing framework. But that is one of the things that that differentiates my project, and I do use my tool on engagements. It's been a while since I've actually used it because I've been stuck in web application land for a couple months. But in the next few months, I should be on a lot more red teams, so you should be seeing more development from me on that side. And there are a lot of very exciting future plans. We have a DerbyCon submission out there that I'm very excited about. It's still a work in progress, but one of the things that is going to happen in the future, and we're working on it right now, is merging Great Scott into the Veil framework, so that you have one comprehensive framework to kind of test these next-gen antivirus products, EDR products, application whitelist solution, whatever it may be. And one of the other plans.
That's awesome. Now, are you co-presenting with the others from the Veil project for this talk?
Yep. I did a submission with Chris Trunser, who's the current maintainer of the Veil framework, and pretty soon here I will also be a Veil developer like him, and have access to the main repo, and assuming that the DerbyCon talk is accepted, then we'll be releasing. I'm not sure what we're calling it yet. I'll say our private repository name is called Great Veil at the moment. We may just call it Veil. Right now I think Veil is at 3.1 or 3.0. We might call it Veil 4.0. We haven't discussed too much of like what the name of it is going to be. It's just we're merging it into Veil and adding new features. There's some really exciting features that we have planned that we're going to integrate on both sides. There's some things that that are in Great Scott that are not in Veil that we're going to expose to the greater framework. And then, like, for example, any Veil PowerShell payload will be able to use any method from invoke obfuscation, because in the future we will have every method of invoke obfuscation within the framework via open source PowerShell, similar to the way the Empire project does it, as an example.
But this is really important, especially the merging of these two products, to allow folks that work for enterprises or even smaller companies to test the effectiveness of their defenses. I mean, it's essentially what both of these projects have in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And like one of the other really cool things that I have planned to hopefully release at DerbyCon, assuming it gets accepted, is a generate all feature. And this would particularly pertain to Great Scott, but we might do something for the greater Veil framework as well. Still in discussions about that, but for at least for Great Scott or the application whitelist bypass portion of the Veil framework, it will essentially dynamically generate every single payload within the framework, every single bypass within the framework, and then use Metasploit UUID tracking. And I actually already have code for this. That's in the old version of Great Scott, if you look way back in the repo. So essentially it's going to write this CSV file and then track which payloads worked and which ones didn't. One of the other things that I really like to do is write like a PowerShell script. The old code uses a batch script. However, a batch script can also be an application whitelist bypass in itself, so I kind of want to move away from that. So probably like a PowerShell script with like Pester, similar to like what Lee Holmes did for the Red Team Atomic Testing Framework. So that way, like an analyst inside of a corporation or even a small business could go and generate all the payloads within the framework. It would automatically start Metasploiting all the listeners. They go over to the victim machine, they transfer the PowerShell script, they run it, and then they get a CSV file to know what they detected and what they didn't. What was successful and what wasn't, and can compare it against, the defense tool console and see what it actually reported on, what it actually stopped, what it maybe just alerted on, and maybe they can shore up some processes surrounding the alerting that they have in the product. I mean, I think there's many different use cases for it, but it's really just to audit your ability to detect and respond to different techniques that are available.
Patrick, you seem intrigued. You have questions. I know your pen testing is your day job, so
I probably have so many questions about this kind of thing. And I even just kind of wanted to take it back to the beginning a little bit. Maybe if you could give us like a use case about where you might use this kind of thing, because I know you were talking about how you've been kind of stuck in web application land, and why necessarily would you not be using this while testing web applications and only in red team, or I think I saw in your description, blue team assessments? Maybe you can kind of talk us through just kind of a usage of Great Scott.
Sure. So you would never use it, or very, very rarely, and maybe in some niche use case, you might use it in a web application.
Yeah, like if you got shell on a Windows box, for example, right, through a web app, which is more rare today. When you're testing the app, it's more about the app functionality rather than getting to the OS. Although, as Chris is saying, it still does happen.
I guess maybe I was thinking if there's like a WAF in place, is just trying to get past that a little bit.
Yeah, and Great Scott wouldn't be used for that at all. It's primarily like right now it is all focused on Windows hosts, really.
Yeah, so all your payloads, Chris, are for Windows operating systems in both Veil and Great Scott, right?
Correct. I don't know about Veil. I think Veil might have some stuff that would work on
maybe
Linux.
Linux.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But at least Great Scott, the application whitelist bypass portion of it, is all strictly Windows at the moment. Eventually, I want to expand into OS X and Linux. However, I want to get complete coverage for Windows first, since I feel like application whitelisting is much more prevalent in Windows, although it is still kind of niche in our industry. You know, not every client has it, but I have been running into it more frequently where they'll just deploy app locker with default rules. And so it's one of those things where, you know, let's say I was doing a red team and I ran into a client that deployed app locker because we recommended to implement application whitelisting, and they did it, and that's amazing. Like, I'm so happy that they're taking our recommendations. Like, it feels good. Then, you know, maybe they don't have all of the knowledge surrounding it, they don't know of these application whitelist bypasses. Like, they're just not privy to them. They're just not aware of them. And so in that scenario, you know, I could use Great Scott to bypass their policy, and then afterwards tell them, like, hey, I used my tool to bypass application whitelisting that you implemented, but if you take my tool and use it and generate the payloads and audit your application whitelist policy, the next time we come in, that's not going to happen. There may be some new one that comes out, but that's part of doing application whitelisting and maintaining your policy. And I'm going to do my best to implement all of the new application whitelist bypasses that come out, but I can't guarantee it.
Chris, do application whitelist companies, do they hate you? Do they love you? Do they ignore you? Like, how does that go?
To be honest, I haven't heard any feedback, good or bad, from application whitelist companies that have commercial products.
Okay, so if they're listening, please contact Chris and don't go the hate route. Go the collaborative route with researchers, as we've talked about on the show in the past, right?
I'll say, you know, at least at Circle CityCon, when I ran into a few different individuals, I'm not going to name drop them or anything, but the particular individual that I'm thinking of worked for Carbon Black.
Sure.
And, you know, he was very interested in it and thought it was cool and wanted to, you know, test it against Carbon Black and, like, the default rules that they deploy for their product.
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris, you say that the vendors that we like to work with and the vendors that we hear from our audience that they like to work with are vendors that are very receptive to your research and want to improve their product. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and then I have other stories of, like, whenever I presented this at Rocky Mountain Information Security Conference. Again, I'm not going to call it names or a company name here, but I had a couple individuals in the audience that actually had implemented application whitelisting and weren't aware of these type of bypasses, and they kind of just had, like, an oh my,
yeah, like deer in the headlights look. Like, my vendor that I bought this from didn't tell me that there was bypasses.
Yeah, and even in some cases, it was like they had implemented AppLocker from Microsoft, right? And they thought they had done their due diligence and done their homework on it and had implemented it properly. So I've had a few individuals like that reach out to me and say, like, they're actually using it to test to see if they can actually block some of these bypasses, and have been paying way more attention to the research that's coming out surrounding it. So for me, like, I think, like, mission accomplished. It's really about raising awareness surrounding this sort of, you know, tradecraft. And, you know, it's becoming more and more prevalent, I think, especially with, like, the MITRE attack framework. It's really getting out there way more. I think I saw there was tons of submissions on MITRE attack framework from some of the reviewers on Twitter for DerbyCon. It seems to be a really hot topic. But,
it is, yeah, certainly.
That's something that, like, I'm not particularly focusing on. I'm focusing on trying to have realistic, weaponized bypasses in the framework that people can use to audit their ability to detect and respond to things or prevent it in the first place, pending what type of solution they have implemented versus application whitelisting versus some next-gen AV or EDR product or, you know, whatever it may be.
And don't get defensive. I mean, like you're saying, people we ran into that got defensive, they usually had now they get this, you know, tunnel vision situation, and they don't read what's going on, and you can never get complacent and think, I've got it, we've got this, marketing told us everything was perfect and it would never be broken. You have to keep reading the research and keep looking at what people are coming up with, because there's always just this spiral of things changing, and the minute you start thinking, we're good, we're defensive, you're wrong. And
well, and kind of like a spin on that, Doug, when a security vendor gets defensive, my first question after being in this industry 17 plus years is, what do you got to hide? Like every time I've seen a vendor like that get defensive about some kind of limitation in their product, I mean, vulnerability, limitation, whatever, sometimes it's one of the two or both, but they've likely got something to hide.
Absolutely.
And you know, John Strand at Black Hills InfoSec has been down this road, certainly with AV bypasses and such. And
but it is tough. I mean, I've made these presentations before to the board, and they're all sitting there. And if you start going, well, it's almost right, then they're like, what do you mean it's almost right? It's going to be 100%. Right, it's going to protect us forever, and nothing will ever change, and we make this investment, and we're done, right? And you're going, well, not really.
I think largely, Doug and Chris, and the folks that are implementing these products and then adopting these frameworks to test them, they understand.
Oh yeah.
And I think even if you're adopting a product like we've matured as an industry or as a community in my mind, such that we're very skeptical of our products and some of their limitations. Yep. And certainly the MITRE ATT&CK framework and other efforts like Atomic Red Team and Chris's projects in Veil have helped us raise that level of skepticism with these products. So, and that's why, Chris, why I believe this is so important. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the show is because we absolutely have to test the effectiveness of all our defensive solutions. And not just do that once, right? Like you got to do this over time,
forever.
And that's why, that's why, Chris, I like your framework.
Yeah,
because it allows people to do that continuous testing and updating it, Chris, with the latest techniques is part of that. It's always a cat and mouse game, right?
Yep. And all of us have to keep kicking that up the ladder because we have to keep convincing all these people who have no idea what he just said. No idea what he just said. That we have to keep convincing them that this is not. You write us one check. And this product will solve all your problems.
Yeah, like all your endpoints are protected.
Everything will never change.
It's unicorns and rainbows and
I see that. I see it over. I get calls like that all the time where they're saying we were sold this product, we were sold this thing. It's a bunch of crap. They told us it was fine, and then we got hacked a week later. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. You have to keep addressing it. You have to keep looking, and you have to keep scanning the industry and watching for what's happening. It just doesn't work like here. I'm going to turn the lock and we're done, and we can we're good. So I like what Chris is saying.
Chris,
and
go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Doug, but I personally, as a pen tester or red teamer, I'm kind of tired of playing the cat and mouse game.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of trying to put everything I can out there.
Yeah.
Without making anyone angry with me.
I think if we could do more of that, we'd be better off.
I don't know if that was live or that shot was live or not. Like, Chris had a visitor from his dog, which is awesome.
Oh,
we're very dog.
Sorry,
dog
I couldn't
friendly.
see.
That's okay.
Yeah.
All I can see is the bar.
I figured that was going to happen at some point, but she's been pretty good, and the other one doesn't really come on the camera or come by me on the computer.
Totally fine. She's like, why are you hogging the spotlight here? I need some
talk to me
some
now.
Airtime on Security Week.
She's just wondering why I'm just sitting here talking and not paying attention to her.
Right. So, Chris, the framework, Great Scott, free, open source. Anyone can go get it. It's on GitHub, right?
Yep. GitHub, it's live right now. GitHub.com/great-SCT/great-SCT. But if you just go to github.com/great-SCT, it'll bring you to the organization page, and you'll be able to find it.
I really hope that you have the opportunity to merge the two projects, Veil and Great Scott, and present at DerbyCon. I think that would be awesome. I think there's many of us in the security field, myself included, that are anxiously awaiting the decisions from the committee at DerbyCon. I am told that they have made final decisions and that they are just working on the schedule, so we should hear soon. Those of us who submitted, hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and a fraction of that are only the ones that are going to be accepted. And I think it's important that we, as a community, support and hopefully they chose talks such as yours that are going to benefit the community. So, and we're all just anxious to see what's the content going to be at DerbyCon, which is awesome. So,
yeah, and regardless of acceptance at DerbyCon, I mean, this is going to happen either way.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Ideally, it happens at DerbyCon, and that's where we release it. It's my favorite conference. I've been there every year. I'm a huge fan of everyone that runs it. It's just
Yeah,
a
except
fantastic
for that
conference.
Dave character. He's kind of shady sometimes, but you know.
Yeah, it's a little shady sometimes. But.
So, Chris, 5 questions with Security Weekly. Are you ready to play?
I guess so.
3 words to describe yourself.
Passionate, crazy, dog lover.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Inside the mind of a conscious hacker.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Computers, I guess. Yeah.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
First, for sure.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Or dogs.
That's a weird question.
That's the weird
That's
one.
the weird one. Okay, yeah. Like Ask Grabby Grabby, Chris was like,
No problem.
spot on. Like, yep, I have no idea what that is, but you know what?
Who doesn't go
Like, he was
first?
right on that Ask Grabby Grabby
Right.
question, but it was like, your parents? Oh, that's a weird question.
I've never had any desire for a celebrity to be my parents, so
They can be historical figures, philosophers,
Grace Hopper.
scientists, actor,
Yeah.
actress. It can be.
Let's say,
it's gender neutral,
Maybe
Chris.
if
We
you
don't
pick
judge.
Dave Kennedy, you get picked by.
You could pick Dave Kennedy.
If-
There's no right or wrong answer here, Chris.
I'd say Nikolai Tesla and Grace Hopper.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. I want to encourage all of our listeners.
As if on cue.
She's like, I want to get back on camera. What's going on? So I want to encourage all of our listeners to check out Great Scott. And Chris, thank you so much for appearing on the show tonight.
Yep. Thanks for having me on, Paul.
And with that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news for this week. Get ready for a lively discussion coming up next. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame. Automate the hunt. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Hello, can you hear? Hey, I'm back. Hey, and we're all back here on Security Weekly. We have Patrick Laverty, Doug White, Jason Wood, and looking down at his crotch is Mr. Jack Daniel.
I thought Jack fell asleep.
Still with us, Jack? His microphone's muted.
Something.
Come back to us, Jack. Come to my head. Come to my head. He's still muted. Hold on. Turning some knobs. Takes Jack a while to get it up and running in his studio.
Not even
up and running in his studio, Jason. That's what I was.
Yeah, that's where you were going.
That's where I was going.
I come back.
Yeah,
Jack. There he is.
What's up, Jack? How are you, Jack? Get jacked in.
It's up and in. Just the tip.
Give it a shake. Nope, can't hear you now. You okay over there? I can't hear you now, Jack. Jiggle the cable.
Turn it off and back on again.
I was just gonna say that. Oh, now he's switching microphones. Look, he's breaking out another.
He had a ball bat. I was like, okay, Jack's gonna take care of it.
Jack's gonna try to hit us.
I just saw the blur of that. I thought that's like, here comes the Louisville Slugger.
Let's talk. Well, Jack bludgeons his audio gear into submission. Let's talk about our first story: the evolutionary waves of penetration. Hey, Jack. Nice to have you with us.
Smooth as butter.
Smooth as butter. Hey, Jack, you still there?
I appear to be.
Okay, good. So, Jeremiah Grossman made a blog post recently that talked about the evolution of vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, which, Jack, as you work at Tenable still, Jason and I are former Tenable employees, and a lot of us, of course, have been around in the assessment and vulnerability and pen testing game for some time. Patrick is a regular penetration tester.
Just regular.
Just regular. Gets lots of fiber in his diet. So,
but I'm not a doctor.
Jeremiah says that the first wave was, you think we have vulnerabilities and want to hire an employee to find them, you're out of your mind. Then the business got over it and actually hired InfoSec people. They said the second wave was, you want us to contract with someone outside the company to come on site, you're out of your mind. And the business got over it, and we're hiring consultants and penetration testers today, I think really more than ever before, which is one of my conclusions from this. But then the third wave was, you want us to hire a third-party company, a scanning service to test our security and store vulnerabilities off-site in the cloud, you're out of your mind. And then businesses got over that and adopted a SaaS-based model. And the fourth wave is, you want us to allow anyone in the world to test our security, tell us about our vulnerabilities, and then reward them? You're out of your mind. And now businesses have gotten over it, and crowdsourced pen tests and bug bounties are a thing today. Now, what I think is interesting in Jeremiah's analysis, I think that's pretty spot on in terms of the waves. I also think he also states, he says, as we see, each new wave doesn't necessarily replace the last, it's additive. And I also think this, my own opinion on this is that it indicates the market for assessments has grown considerably, despite those kind of pundits that are poo-pooing, the assessment and pen testing process. So I thought that was an interesting read for our audience. It's a very short post. I mean, I think if you've listened to what I just said, you probably
that's pretty much
about
all of it. The whole post.
I pretty much read his post verbatim. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think that's where we're getting to. We saw that with other types of security, or other types of software, We saw companies go through these same kind of things where it was all self-contained. Nobody ever looked at it. We saw them say, well, what if we had somebody else look at it from the outside and test for problems? And they said, okay, yeah, I guess we can get around that. I said, what if we, and we get to the sort of Microsoft model of let's just throw it out there and let people report bugs, and when it reports in, we'll fix it.
Right.
And that's kind of the same thing. So now we're saying, well, there's a whole world of people who are going to pen test us whether we want them to or not. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the whole world is going to pen test you whether you want them to or not, or whether you pay them or not. Yep. So
the difference is you're not going to get the results unless there's evidence of a breach.
So why don't we do that? Yeah. Let it crowdsource, pay people bug bounties to look at it, and we'll get many more eyes than by hiring one consultant to come in and take a look.
I think you need to be focused on what you of your assets you put in each of these categories, right?
Yeah.
Like in the first part is like if you have employees that are doing internal pen testing, where are you focusing them? And that's going to differ per organization, right? And you have to keep them focused. I think the second thing of, well, you want to hire an outside company, well, what are you going to focus them on? And that's going to be balanced against what your current security program is. And then, the third wave of the cloud, to me, that's just kind of a no-brainer. I think the majority of organizations still today can benefit from SaaS and cloud technologies. They provide better security than likely in certain areas, maybe not 100% across the board, but in certain areas, a SaaS or cloud infrastructure provider can give you better security than you can provide on your own. And then, the fourth wave of bug bounties, you want to be really focused on that, right? And I think the mistake that a lot of companies make with bug bounties is they take something that they haven't paid attention to, they haven't applied those previous 3 phases right? And they go, oh, let's do a bug bounty. I don't think that's a really good idea.
I agree with that one. I mean, I think it needs to be the fourth wave.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't think I hope that's not what he's meaning. I don't think it is, that he's saying, oh, we're now at the fourth wave. You don't need to worry about the first 3 waves. I'm like, take these in waves, and then when you put it out there for the whole world, then you're saying, okay, we think it's good. You tell us. Is there something that we didn't think of?
I think it's a due diligence kind of thing. You have to do your due diligence before you put it out for a bug bounty.
Be stone cold crazy to throw a beta product out there. Yeah.
The bug bounty companies will tell you, oh, everyone's ready for a bug bounty, right? And they're falling into the trap that so many fall into on Shark Tank, right? When the panel asks the founder of the company, who is going to buy your product? And like, my product's for everyone.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, and they're off, and the sharks eat them alive. You have to know your target audience, right? And I think that there's a certain maturity model, and this could vary in aspects of your business, right? Like you may, again, like I said, focus your internal pen testers on a specific set of assets or applications. I think that the cloud-based scanners, I think web application scanning is a great opportunity for that. I mean, there's some awesome cloud-based web app scanners. I know because I've tested, a couple of years ago, I tested a lot of them in the lab and their effectiveness. I think that even since then, fast forward 2.5 years, they've gotten even better in integrating into your processes. That's a great place to outsource. And sure, they're all cloud-based systems. I mean, most of the products you're buying today going to be cloud-based systems.
Only way I say you do the fourth wave first is if it's an alpha. If you've just got something, you want to throw it out there and just see what happens. And it's not production ready. It's not in production. It's just something you say, hey, we're just going to throw this out and let everybody poke at it, and you tell us what's wrong. And we're not running it. Nobody's using it. It's just,
Yeah, but don't develop your app with like a traditional waterfall approach.
Well, no.
And then go, oh yeah, like we did some small security tests at the end of our development, and now we're going to put it out there for the whole world. Like, no. Yeah. If you've actually, right, Jason, if you followed a proper SDLC in developing the application from the beginning, including threat modeling, then you throw it out there for bug bounties.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the additive. Jeremiah says this is additive and stuff like that, and I think Patrick can probably has experienced this, where you get a hold of a penetration test, for example, just to the second wave, and they haven't done the first steps of checking to see what they have going in their environment. And you get in there and you're like, oh, you guys were not ready for this at all. If you haven't done the basics leading up to a bug bounty, I mean, you're going to get slaughtered. Yep. So,
but everybody's always looking for the shortcut. I mean,
but Jack, I think this also plays into vulnerability management, right? Like, if you're hiring a company and you haven't done any internal vulnerability scanning or vulnerability management, like, Tenable is among other companies that give you the facilities to do this yourself internally.
Yeah, there are all sorts of things that need to happen, and that's part of the business proposition of the bug bounty companies is helping you navigate this, and they will, like an offensive security organization, a consultant will be like, nope, you're not getting a red team. We're gonna do an asset inventory first because you don't even know what you've got,
right?
And to traditional vuln assessment, not even vuln management. How many times have all of us done simple vuln assessment and realized that the organization has has 20, 30, 50% more devices than they thought they had. We need 4,000 IPs, and when you get to 12,000 IPs, you all freak out. I'm like, well, we should talk about what your environment looks like.
Right. And Jack, it's a great point too, because when you run those initial scans, if the company says, well, I'm doing some level of patching, like we've got some people focused on patching, and if the first half hour of your scan, even if it's a small environment, and you're like 1,000 vulnerabilities, 1,000 more vulnerabilities of missing patches, and you're like, you're not really doing patch management. Like, let's start there. It's okay for a company that starts that assessment and goes, okay, I want to now help you with your patch management because you need to be able to do that, right?
I think it's telling, to that point about asset discovery, that Jeremiah and Lana and RSnake, that team is just launched the new company that's doing asset discovery and tracking. It's like
wait, hold on. Are Jeremiah and RSnake working together again? If I go back
again,
to history,
new company.
Right? Yeah, okay.
Jeremiah and his wife and RSnake, and I forget who else is involved. They have an asset discovery and management organization that they've founded, because even though it's 2018. Moving to Excel would be a step forward for a lot of organizations, and he actually just commented on that how popular Excel is as a asset inventory, and everybody here and most of our listeners, I'm sure, have seen that, and most of us have probably done that, particularly in smaller environments, but that's not exactly dynamic. So when on the bug bounty side. Yeah, you can't just turn people loose on these things. You need to know what you're doing. Yeah. You need a little guidance. If you're a huge organization and have a lot of experienced people, then maybe you can get away with rolling your own bug bounty. But that's the value proposition of dealing with one of the bug bounty companies, or dealing with our friend Katie at Luda Security, who helps people navigate this to do it well, so that you're not wasting money. But it comes back to doing the. I want a red team. It's like, no, you need an asset inventory, and then we're going to do some phone scanning, and then we're going to look at things before we prove that you're vulnerable. It's like, I just walked in. I get it. We're not going to waste your time and money. And that's where investing in the right kind of consulting will save you money in the long run.
Mm. And I'm kind of amazed at the technology today that allows you to do that patch management, even if you're a smaller company, and have that process. And you have to buy into the process and implement it. But then, like, once you get to the point where you're like, oh, we need a solution for that. Actually, one of our sponsors, and it's a company that Ron Goulet invests in, is called Automox. And that's what we're using here at Security Weekly, right? Like, I would have never had like one of our friends come in and do an assessment of us until we had implemented a solution like that, to have Automox. And not only is that company going to help you inventory and assess your process, right? And your patches. Assess your patches, but your process, right? Like, here's where we think moving forward operationally, we can be the most effective balance between uptime, availability, reliability, and security. So here's our balance. Help us understand how much risk there means to our balance, and maybe that means we adjust our balance. Maybe that means there's some more downtime, to apply patches more quickly. Maybe that means we switch applications to something more resilient so that we can patch more frequently. That's where a good consultant is going to help you strike that balance. I want to move into a security awareness in our next story. Ira Winkler wrote an article for Dark Reading. And it's interesting because Ira is very much been in the security training and awareness space for some time. It's basically saying, like, The fundamental flaw in security awareness programs are it tries to train everyone and train them kind of outside of the scope of their job to identify security vulnerabilities or potential security threats. And he's like, almost 100% of the time, that's a complete failure. And so what he says, and I'll quote, he says that he frequently uses the example that employees know they should not watch pornography at work. While compliance requires that this be stressed, employees know that they can be fired even without having the proper training. People know and accept the fact that there are practices they have to adhere to as part of their job responsibility as a condition of continued employment. Security managers need to utilize this fact and stop abdicating their responsibility to implement security practices into business processes. This is the core function of any person overseeing a critical responsibility. Ira's putting the security responsibility on the managers to make sure that it's in the culture, in the process, that as they do their job, there's security checks and balances and controls in their jobs. I thought that was spot on, because I think we're always, to Ira's point, we're in a losing battle if we've got 1,000 or 100,000 employees and we're going to say, look, hey, don't click on that link. Like, that message is not going to get through to anywhere close to 100% of your employees.
Yeah, but you also have to be careful, because you start pushing too much on your employees. You're assuming somebody's going to be able to do a job they've not been trained for. They're going to solve problems they've not been able to do. I agree with you about the porn thing, and there's things that just in our society and our social structure that we sort of inherently know are wrong. Okay, that's a really nice binary example. I shouldn't look at porn at work. Okay, I got it. But when you start talking about you shouldn't make a mistake, if you make a mistake, you're out. And I had this argument with somebody not so long about a totally different subject, where they started coming in, and I'm going to sound like the most insensitive person here, and I know everybody knows how sensitive I am and how empathetic I am. But we were told that they wanted to train us in spotting psychological problems and potential issues with students. And I said, I do not want that. Don't put that on me. I do not want to be told I am responsible for identifying that suicidal student, because I'll fail at it. Like, that wasn't part of the job when I signed up. And I think you're going to get some pushback for employees when you start telling them, okay, you don't have any training, you don't have any experience, and you don't think like all of us do. You're an accountant. And now I'm going to tell you, oh yeah, you're going to get fired from your job if you make a mistake with some hacker who's a professional who's been working at this, and they've got expertise in how to manipulate you. And if Kevin Mitnick can talk his way into the building, you're out. And I used to try to tell companies, don't fire people when they fail a physical pen test. When somebody gets past a guard, don't fire that guard. Train them better. Teach them to do a better job. So I think you have to be careful about overstepping this, because companies love that binary solution. They love you, like what you said. They want people to say, if you don't do this right, you're fired.
Yeah, Ira's not talking about blaming the employee. They're talking about not blaming the manager, but not necessarily firing the manager.
Well, that's fine
when that happens, right? What Ira's saying is that the managers need to be responsible for building the culture, building the process, and including security in there. So in other words, in my daily process, there's checks and balances to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. I mean, that doesn't. Nothing's saying that 100%.
No, I agree.
Happens, right?
Yeah,
but I think what Ira's saying is, and again, Ira can certainly is more than welcome on the show. He's been on our shows in the past. I like him as a person in his industry, certainly, and I respect his opinion. And what I think he's saying is that if you have security in mind when you build your processes, that naturally it's resilient to attacks, right? And I think what your university might be saying is, if we can build into some of the culture of teaching that we're able to spot a student that might be in trouble, and whether it's suicide or any other kind of issue. And I completely
agree.
Right?
My point was, we have to be careful, though, that we don't, and we were talking about this earlier in the other segments, you have to be careful that you don't pitch this as a one-stop solution to everything. And I just reviewed one of these things, just these training things. Sure. And they hand you this as an employee, and they say, here, learn the 7 key points in a phishing attack. And you click the button and
there's
say,
like a horrible training and
awareness.
Absolutely.
It's awful.
And that's where the problem starts, because then you are saying, here's this, we did it, you took the training once a year and you're done, you're good to go. And that isn't going to help. And I do so many of these things now. I do one for security clearance, I do one for sexual harassment, I do one for student empathy, or whatever they call it. and now we're going to have to do one for fishing, and all these pieces, and every one of them is the same thing. It's just, Bob and Sarah are in the break room.
Yeah. But no, Ira's putting on Bob and Sarah's manager. So he tells a story in this article, and he says, he's used social engineering tactics to have a guard issue him a badge and give him sensitive access. He received a call from the facilities manager asking for the name of the guard. Like basically had a successful, and Patrick, you guys do social engineering, right? In your job. So the manager of the facilities was in contact with Ira, and he's like, I want to know which guard gave you the access. And Ira's like, he informed the security manager that the fact that he didn't know which guard issued him the badge was worse than the guard issuing him the badge, putting it right back on the manager. He also informed him that it was his fault that there was no documented process for issuing badges, and since he couldn't point to a documented action that the guard didn't follow, that it was the manager's fault that the badge was issued. And I thought that was again, it's not 100%.
It has to go
I think
back.
it's a good way of thinking about the
No, I
problem,
completely agree.
right?
I don't think the article's wrong. I'm just trying to make sure we make the point correctly. It goes back to what I call the dumb guard scenario. You really, if you're gate guard, no offense, gate guard people, you really want the dumbest person imaginable. and you well, I mean, think about it.
No offense.
I'm not saying.
I like how he used social engineering to say no offense.
Right.
But
No
I mean, but you really I'm not saying we have those people, and I'm not saying that the gate guard is dumb.
Email Doug@security.com.
I hate you all.
Here comes the gate guard union.
But listen, the dumb gate guard scenario is simple. Paint a yellow line on the floor, and you say anybody who approaches that yellow line and they don't have a green badge and they're holding it out like this, you shoot them in the face. And if you've got the dumbest guard imaginable, I'll call it a robot, whatever you want to do, the robot goes, problem solved. You won't have a security problem because anybody who doesn't follow the rules gets shot in the face. And then you have another robot to drag the corpses off the side and toss them in a leaf shredder. Problem solved. Very simple solution. I mean,
Doug, you need to write a script for the movies.
So the TSA model.
The TSA,
TSA model. Yeah, but something like that.
Except those rules change on a daily basis. And they're different for every single airport.
This toothpaste tube doesn't squeeze properly. I'll have to confiscate it. But that knife is okay. Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, the point is that you have to have good procedure. And that's what I mean by the dumb guard, not that the guard itself is actually dumb. It has to be a good procedure that someone can follow very succinctly, or they get manipulated. Because the minute they start having to think,
there has to have balance, right?
Absolutely.
Like you can't be shooting people in the face, right? There has to be some kind of balance.
And because you don't have the simple solution of the yellow line on the floor, you have a much more complex environment. You have to have good processes, though, so when someone gets a call, or they get an email, or they get a request, they know what to do. And that's where the manager comes in, and they say, we've trained our people, and we say, when the phone rings and they say, give us the combination of the safe, you know what to do about that. I don't give that out. I mean, I got tons of training for security clearance at government lab, and it was always, and they did it over and over again until you felt like a moron, which, okay. Not that I was a dumb guard, but hey, I mean, when I got back, but I knew when I answered the phone that I was supposed to say one thing. I was supposed to say, please contact media services at 401, and you did that a lot, and they made you do it until you did it.
But does Ira also talk about how this kind of thing really has to start at the top?
Yes.
Because it has to start at the top, and there also has to be common sense in it as well, right? Like this culture, I think culture has to start at the top, and that culture should also help breed common sense. You have to balance automation and common sense. And we're talking about physical security, right? And some of the physical assessments I've done, they've had this great electronic system that can sense when you're trying to tailgate, right? You're trying to walk behind someone who's going up to the elevators. There are these gates. I don't know if you've seen this in your physical assessments, Patrick, but right, the person badges in front of me. It can sense if I'm behind them and haven't badged in, it sets off an alarm. That's a great, I think of that as like security orchestration and automation response. Like that's a great way to alleviate some of the assessment and responsibilities of the guard,
right?
Which I'm not going to deem as dumb. The guard has help in technology. Now it's not the 100%, right? Because common sense comes into play when I can walk around the guard desk and there's a conference room behind the guard that has an Ethernet port, that there's no cameras or any other kind of security, and I can go plug in. And this is based on a real life pen test that I did way back in the day. And so I'm like, we have good that you had a guard, good that you had some automation to help the guard apply your security rules, bad that you didn't have that all-encompassing solution to realize some of your weaknesses as well.
And that's also great that you have those kind of controls, but we also need to make sure that our guard is checking on them. Because I know there was one where I tailgated right in, alarms went off.
And the guard did nothing.
Nothing.
Yes.
Because the guard's busy doing other things, answering the phone, checking in other people.
And the dumb guard doesn't imply anything about the person. It means that it's the behavior. So the dumb guard means they have a procedure to follow, and they follow it, and they don't start thinking about it, and they don't get talked out of their desk, and they say, I'm sorry, you don't get in without a badge, no matter what you do. The person doesn't have to be stupid, and that wasn't my, I don't want to imply that about anybody. I'm just saying that's the way they need to behave, and we got that same training for top secret, because that's loose lips sink ship. That was a whole culture of, you know, I would make some joke, and not that I ever make jokes, and I'd say, you know, we don't get paid enough here. I'm going to sell this to the Russians, and the next thing I know, my secretary's already called in Secret Service and said, this guy said he's going to sell something to the Russians. Well, today that would be a plus, but at that time it was an enemy.
Yeah.
Today they'd be like, yay!
Yeah, I had that same kind of...
What do you mean you're going to sell it? You just share it. Like, hold on.
I actually said I wouldn't sell it to the Russians.
Then it was a problem. Now today that would be a problem.
Slip of the lip. Yeah.
Yeah, some don't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, they don't. I found that out. That was one of my first life lessons when I learned the Secret Service has no sense of humor.
Oh, and now speaking of social engineering, we've heard of the SIM card hijacking attacks. And the particular provider in this case was T-Mobile. And I don't know what providers everyone's using today, but I know at least with my provider, there's an extra PIN now. And say what you will about PIN number security, it does provide an extra level of protection.
Every factor you add.
Right? Every factor you add prevents the attacker from basically hijacking the SIM. It's also, I think, a case to have better two-factor authentication that's not tied to your SIM. So here's what happens. The attacker social engineer the cellular provider to switch your SIM card to your number to a new SIM card. So all of a sudden, in this story, I thought was pretty well written, actually. It says, you know, she was at home. All of a sudden, her phone stops working. She can't text. She turns it off, turns it on again, goes to her husband. Husband calls the phone. It rings, but not on her phone because someone has had her number assigned to a different SIM card. Why would someone go through all that trouble is certainly my question, right? Like your average attacker, your average person, like why would the attacker go through this? I mean, attackers like automated attacks, right? They don't necessarily target a particular person and social engineer the cellular provider. When I'm reading this article, I'm like, what did this person have to like demand that level of attention and effort from the attacker?
They owned at Rainbow.
Yeah. So
they have an Instagram account.
Yeah, they're asking Rachel Adam to give up her @Rainbow Twitter account. In the buzzing underground market for stolen social media and gaming handles, a short, unique username can go between $500 and $5,000. There's your economic incentive. According to people involved in the trading, reviewing listings of popular marketplace, several hackers involved in the market claim that the Instagram account of @T, for example, recently sold for around $40,000 in the equivalent Bitcoin. So now we've got people who are like, oh, why am I being targeted? Well, you're only targeted because you have something that is of value on the underground. In this case, it's a social media account.
And you may not even know that.
A Twitter account, and you may not realize that.
Yeah, because you just happen to own @Cornholio or something, and everybody, and you're thinking that's worthless to me, but
right. So I thought that the attack wasn't necessarily novel or interesting.
No.
But the reason why these folks were being attacked is interesting, which is why I think we need to really promote usage of things like proper two-factor authentication. That's a token, it's a Google Authenticator app, that your passwords are unique and being stored in LastPass. I think you may poke fun at some of the inconvenience or maybe distrust you have with storing your password stored in the cloud, but it helps with these style attacks.
And you also need, we were talking earlier in one of the other segments about asset management, asset assessment. You as a person need to take a little bit of time and think about because we think very heavily about our physical assets. So if you've got a coffee can full of gold in your house, you go, that's valuable. I probably shouldn't leave it on the front porch with a sign on it. But you have all these things in the world that everyone can see, even if they don't really know who you are. and they may well be valuable. So like the person who owned sex.com.
I was going to say you own a domain that could fetch a lot of money.
But I mean, I never stopped kicking myself because back in 97 or 96, I could have licensed.
No, don't tell me. Did you have a domain that would be worth millions?
I didn't. I just wish I had. I could have. You know, I was like, I could have licensed all kinds. Just pick any dirty word you can think of right now. I could have licensed it, and I would have owned it, and
not
it would be
even
worth
dirty
money.
word. Any short
Pepsi
domain. Well,
that was a tough one. Yeah, trademark names are difficult.
Trademark names, you could, speaking from experience, you could run into trouble with a trademark name.
But I mean, you could have licensed sex.com.
To be honest with you, a lot of those cases went in favor of the person that owned Pepsi.com before Pepsi did it. So case law has actually proven that, you can command whatever price
you want. So you may have things, because especially as new things come along, and you jump into Instagram on day 2, and you say, I created @Rainbow, and all of a sudden, a year later, that becomes something valuable, or even something that evolves into being valuable, because if you owned, @Rainbow or whatever, and it's not worth anything today, but next month there's a new company starts called Rainbow, and suddenly it's very valuable, and somebody knows I can sell that for $500,000 to the Rainbow company. Wow, you might want to keep an eye on that.
OPSEC is huge for more. We used to think of OPSEC as I work for the government, maybe I work for an agency, my OPSEC has to be strong, or I'm a fund manager for hundreds of millions or $1 billion. Sure, my OPSEC's got to be good, right? Now we're seeing like your OPSEC has to be good if you've got an Instagram account.
You're like, a 13-year-old girl who set up at Unicorn.
Yeah.
Like, oops, now you're a giant target.
Like, dude, your OPSEC has to be on point. And I don't think you have to do anything extravagant, right? Like, you don't have to go hire Michael Bazell to help secure your own personal OPSEC, right? Like, I think it really comes down to having a really strong two-factor authentication, using a password manager, applying two-factor to that. Like, I really think that covers you.
Awareness.
And then beyond that, right, we talk about situational awareness and
I was just going through all this with a local friend of mine recently, where he contacted me and said for some reason he might have irritated some certain people that he's concerned about. So I was starting.
It wasn't me, I swear.
So I started going through some of the things with him that he should be concerned with, and said, like, I'm more than happy to look at whatever you got. He's like, well, obviously first I need to do an inventory of everything I have. And he said the first thing he's probably going to do is like get rid of his domain and let his parent company handle all that kind of thing. He's like, the only thing that I'm really still left with is my social media and my email. So like you guys were saying, it's like, well, if that's all you really have, then make sure you have the strong passwords and make sure you have the non-phone two-factor authentication.
Right.
Have some kind of other device on that. But then the other thing that I was asking him about is, you're worried about the content of your email. I don't know exactly why he's overly concerned about the social media kind of stuff, but you're concerned about what's in your email because maybe there's kind of strategy kind of things in there. But I've been to his office, and his office just kind of has a lock that you could kind of bump into a little bit easily. And it's like, are you also concerned about from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. that somebody could very easily just kind of pick that lock or bump their way in? That's probably the direction that I would go if I knew that all this kind of stuff was also stored in a file cabinet, knowing that you're going to have these kinds of extra protections in place. And it's not hard to figure out that you have something more than just a weak password on your Gmail account.
Yeah. It's interesting to help folks with that, and I've helped people over the years, and it gets a little uncomfortable because you're like, all right, like, dude, like, it's just me and you, like, spill your guts, dude. Like,
what you got?
Who is she? Like what's the motivating factor? Like, does she have a new boyfriend or husband or whatever? Like, like it gets into stuff like that when we get into these personal cases. Certainly, I think even segueing off of our story into those cases, I find it frightening that law enforcement's not a lot of help in those cases. Yeah, it's interesting.
Another situation I saw recently, a friend was at the beach, had his phone stolen. And like 2 hours later, after realizing the phone was stolen, he gets a phone call from the person that stole the phone wanting money for the phone. And
like at his like home number?
Yeah, like his wife's number, I think, which is probably in it. And he said like his wife just went off on this person, scaring them to the point where they said, I'm just going to leave this at the AT&T store. You can come get it.
reverse social engineering.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, we've made a way to make that phone detonate remotely, so I hope you enjoyed your right hand. Here you go, 3, 2, 1.
And I was like,
and the dude's just sitting back like, dude, you pissed off my wife. Like, good luck with that.
Right. Good luck to you. I'm like, you going to file charges or anything like that? He's like, well, we got pictures of the person, but the police didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's like, are you
it's sad. Yeah.
I don't think I'll defend the law enforcement.
You've been in a lot of cases.
I'll defend the law enforcement side of this. Look, these cases are small. Law enforcement does want to help. I mean, I've never once ever been anywhere. I've dealt with a lot of law enforcement. I've never once seen a police agency ever sit there and go, I don't want to help my citizens. They really don't. The problem is person hours and prioritization. So it's like, okay, we can help this person who lost their phone, and I could put 2 detectives on it, and they may have 1 chance in 1,000 of figuring out what happened and getting the phone back because it's it's a missing phone. Or I can prosecute this child rapist. I wish we had 10 times the resources we have, and I could put 5 detectives on every call that comes in, but I don't have that. Our budget's cut every week, and on and on.
But from an OPSEC perspective, that phone's still online. If you're not remotely wiping that device, it's not good OPSEC.
Right.
That takes it off the table. Then it's just a hunk of electronics.
Yeah.
Sure, go sell it. I got insurance. You can actually get insurance for a stolen phone. Sure, you still got to pay $100 or $200, or less, somewhere between $50 and $200 to get a new phone, which is a fraction of the cost of a brand new phone.
When you get good law enforcement training, so if your local law enforcement people, if they're trained well, they got a computer crimes unit, and they can tell you how to do that, and say, just right there on the phone and say, look, we'll probably not be able to get your phone back, but if you do these 3 things, do it, and it's going to brick the phone.
You're going to spend way more than $200. Let's take the top cost, $200. You're going to spend way more than $200 of your time, police officers' time, your friends' time.
$20,000.
Dude, lost your phone, remote wipe it, go get a new one.
Brick
I mean,
it,
I've lost my phones. Fortunately, I've never gotten a phone call from someone that found my phone. I've been able to remote wipe them, and I go out and get a new phone. I don't like it when I lose my phones. Nobody does, but I mean, you're lying if you said you've never. I mean, maybe you have never lost a phone. There's a huge percentage of people listening to the show right now, like, yeah, I've lost a phone.
It's like losing your wallet. It sucks,
happens,
but move
dude.
on.
It happens,
or worse,
right?
I mean, you lose your wallet, you lose your purse, you lose your car keys, you lose all these things, and you just have to work around it and move on. And so that's
now. Fortunately, most of the other than times I have actually physically lost my phone. The other times I've lost shit like my wallet or my phone is because I just misplaced them, and I do eventually find them. But I did lose an iPhone, and I did lose one of my Nexus 7 devices. And I'm like, remote wipe.
Yep.
Well, here's what I'm going to tell everybody. It's what I tell clients. Have a plan.
Yeah.
Just like you have a plan, or I hope you have a plan. What is your plan when you lose your car keys? If you got small children or whatever, if it's just you, like I always tell, I was just traveling in Europe with my daughter, who's now a grown-up, but when she was little, I was traveling with her in Europe and places, and I found this very stressful feeling because I had always traveled by myself. And when it's just me, I don't care. I mean, I'm like, the worst thing can happen to me, I get, like my throat cut. Okay, well, it sucks, but life goes on. Well, actually, it doesn't, but... but I mean, you move on. But when you got this other person you're responsible for, so then you start thinking, I need to have a plan. What if I lose my wallet? What if you lose your wallet today at work and you've lost credit cards, driver's license, all these things? Okay, money, who cares? It's just cash. You can get more. But, when you lose these things, you need to have a plan to deal with it. So you really need to have a plan for this quintessential portion of your life. What are you going to do when you lose this? So start thinking about that. This is an expensive device. You treat it like it's not, but it is. It's got your whole life in it, and it could cause you a great deal of harm if someone steals it. So you need to have some kind of plan ready in place. That's your quick action OPSEC plan for when you lose your phone. And that ought to be everybody from your 12-year-old kid all the way up to whomever, because you need to be ready. And so what do you do?
Passcode, fingerprint reader, two-factor authentication is key, because even if they do get into the device, when you do try and log in from Facebook or whatever, first of all, it's going to send me a notification of where you are. Second of all, two-factor authentication has been enabled, and you can name my two-factor token, which is why I like the two-factor that separates it from your phone. Right. It's even which is why, I mean, they're not a sponsor, but I like the YubiKey.
Yep.
And especially with the Google Pixel that I have, the Pixel 2, the YubiKey can actually go right into the USB-C port that's the one I use on my phone, so that it's a physical token that's separate. And hopefully you didn't like lose your pants that have your two-factor token and your phone in them, right? Usually those are, it's a case for keeping them separate.
And
then
when
you're minimizing your damages.
And so this is the red card. So we always call this the red card. That when I used to design these kind of OPSEC things for people, it was the red card. So the red card needs to tell you, and this is back to the dumb guard, and I know nobody likes that name, but that's what I call it. This is back to the simple, something you follow, you don't have to think. There was an old thing on airplane systems. If you get an unusual attitude and you're pointed at the ground, the system literally starts saying, don't think, pull up. Because they don't want you to start going, what should I do? You use the red card, says, when do I brick? Don't brick too soon. Because, oh, yeah, the phone was actually in my other pants.
The phone was in the couch.
But when do you brick? What steps do you take? And you just really need to stop while you don't have any stress, while you're sitting around in your living room and think, what does my red card say about my extremely valuable, in many ways?
It depends on how valuable your information is. Like in Enemy of the State, when Gene Hackman had to pull the string, red card is the whole building blows up.
Hell yeah. And I mean, and that's the same thing with this. It's like, when do you brick it? I mean, maybe you do have state secrets involved in this, and you say, the minute I don't know where that is for more than 5 minutes, I brick the damn thing, and I set it to detonate in 5 minutes. But on most people, it's like, well, I'm going to, give it 30 minutes or an hour and make sure I didn't lose it. Or I'm going to do this. I'm going to find my iPhone, and I'm going to see if it's showing it's still in my house. Maybe I don't need to brick it. Oh, no, it's showing it's on a train moving toward New Jersey. Maybe you should brick the phone right now. And how do I do that? What are the steps they take? What is the site I need to go to?
I like the thieves that steal technology solely for the purpose of just wiping them and reselling them.
Yeah.
Because
your stuff's gone.
They do it for me, like whatever. It never comes back online. If it does, it's going to be remote wiped, which is how most of the remote wiping features work. And if you're just selling it for the device, like, hey, it's my fault for losing it. We're going to get a new device. No harm, no foul. Scary when you get a phone call after you lose device, though.
Get insurance.
That's a wake-up call for, I think, a lot of people.
You can get insurance for it.
Now, does iOS have native software to brick it?
Yep, it sure does.
Yeah, I think both Android and iOS have a facility for remote
wiping. I put a third-party app
Even
on
better.
there.
You can do that too.
Where I can just text it with all different commands. Like one of the even things it can set off an alarm, which would be
that's my thing. Well, yeah, if you can make the phone do something obnoxious, like it starts saying, "I'm stolen, I'm stolen, I'm stolen, I'm stolen, I'm stolen," and there's no way to stop it. It's like that'd be pretty fun.
I can take pictures of whoever's on it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, flip the camera on and you can see where it is. Yeah. It's just
so there was an interesting thing that happened. I don't know, those of you that have kids, Roblox.
Oh boy,
yeah.
I know my kids play Roblox. My two older sons play Roblox. Kind of on and off. I think Fortnite has been pretty popular. Certainly Minecraft as well. Roblox is thrown in the mix.
Now, what is Roblox?
It's kind of like a Minecraft or Fortnite style.
It's like a non-violent World of Warcraft where you can play. It's an MMO.
And interact with other people.
Yeah, there's all kinds of live users from all over the world on it. You can build things. You can. Yeah, it's for kids primarily.
It's like Minecraft.
Yeah, it's just a different.
So what's the worst thing that you think you could do on there?
Well, so apparently my question is how, but apparently the incident involved one bad actor that was able to subvert the protective systems and exploit one instance of the game running on a single server. They have zero tolerance for this behavior, which was essentially like a gang rape. Like all their characters came in and raped the character in the game, which the
like Legos bumping together.
The age group for this game is probably 5 to 13 years old. Would you say, Doug?
And the one that it happened to was a 6-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And as it was happening, she said, "Mommy, there's something weird going on." Fortunately, her mother realized it quickly, took it away.
Right.
So the girl didn't see much of
what's
this.
interesting is it's all through the article, like you need to monitor your children, blah, blah, blah. But, Roblox is a game like Minecraft that's targeted towards kids. And you're like, well, if they're playing video games, like they're not on YouTube or the web potentially getting into trouble. Maybe you have filtering, maybe you don't. You realize that, like with my kids, they're hackers. They've been to hacker conferences. They could probably subvert whatever filtering I put in place. So you work with them and educate them, and it's about training and awareness we talked about earlier. Also, I think, like, my number one piece of advice when parents ask me, how do I prevent my children from getting into trouble on the internet? I'm like, you put your PC in a public area, right? You put it in the middle of the family room when they use it, everyone is sitting there watching what they're doing. I mean, it's like self-policing at that point. Jason, is that your strategy too with your kids? Like you put the PCs in plain view of the whole family, right?
Yeah, exactly. We had an area in our house. It's right off the family room and the dining area, and there it was. And anytime the kids were doing something or other, I could walk over and take a look, and it wasn't any kind of an issue. So, yeah, you get into things like that where no, can I take the laptop back to my room? No, that sort of thing.
Right.
It becomes more difficult though when you got a 17, 18-year-old, but
yeah, don't remind me.
That's where I'm at.
If I had it to do over again, I just wouldn't have kids.
It's a little late once that one happens, though, Jack.
That's it.
Yeah, I know. Regrets. I've had a few. Well, 2 of them.
Oh,
Wow.
I'm glad to know I'm no longer the least sensitive member of the staff. So.
Poor Nathan. Come on now, Jack. You love your kids.
Hey, one of them's a keeper, really.
Now you sound like Bert Kreischer when he talks about his kids, the comedian. It's pretty funny. His stand-up is on Showtime is just so he talks about security in that. Speaking of kids and security, and so if you watch a Showtime special, I don't want to give away all of it, but I thought his story was freaking hilarious because it seems to me like he's got one kid and she's she's one of his children and goes about life not so much like a hacker. His younger daughter, I'm like, he doesn't say it in the thing, but as he describes her, I'm like, dude, she's a hacker. And so she here's this safety awareness thing at school, and it's like you need to come up with a safe word. So basically, whoever picks you up from school has the safe word as an extra safeguard. And she's like all on board with this strategy, which makes me think like his daughter has a future in information security, like totally. And so she's like, Dad, what should our safe word be? And Bert's like, well, like maybe the name of our dog. She's like, Dad, that's a horrible idea. He's like, well, what about the name of the street we live on? She's like, Dad, people can use Google. Like, do better than that. So she's like, what about motherfucker? And he's like, yeah, motherfucker. Let's use motherfucker. and then he proceeds to tell him how, like, the uncle or the family friend or whatever goes and picks him up from school, and she's like, what's the safe word? And he's like, it's that word, it's a bad word we're not supposed to say. And she's like, I'm not getting in the car until you say the safe word. So he's like, motherfucker. She's like, I didn't hear you. And all her teachers are standing behind her. And he's like, motherfucker. And she's like, all right, now I'll get in the car. And all the teachers turn around. And I'm like, she has a future in information security right there. Sign her up.
She'll be in Vegas in a couple years.
She's awesome. I'm a fan.
Up on stage.
I wish I'd had that safe word, yeah.
Right? I think the safe word's a good idea.
No, we had it, but it wasn't that. I wish I'd had that word.
That word, right?
No, my word was really boring. So
because to her point, which is why one of the reasons why she has a future in InfoSec was, well, someone's trying to lure me into the car. They're not going to use expletives. Because then she'll know something's wrong.
It's a great idea.
I thought it was brilliant. I'm like, your child is brilliant.
No one would say that to a child.
Yeah,
I mean, and a child molester would never want to be, single
offending the
child. The teachers are going, wow, that man just said motherfucker to this little girl.
Him out of here.
Jesus, call the cops. Right. Exactly. I'm like, that's a really brilliant idea.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
We're pretty liberal with our language at home too. Like mommy and daddy can say certain things that,
Yeah, my daughter said, get out of the way, you fucking old bag, when somebody pulled out in front of her grandmother once. And my mother was like, what? And my daughter said, that's what you say when somebody pulls out in front of you.
That's what Daddy told me to say.
It's the safe word, Mom.
You started telling the story. I thought you were going to say she said that to you in your front of the fridge or something.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Right. You were in France, so, Well, I guess a lot of people speak English in France too. But what was your experience? No, you didn't go to Hack Paris, right? You were in Paris, but you didn't.
I didn't go to Hack Paris. Yeah, it was just I had to go do a presentation.
You were an academic
I did a presentation about developing cybersecurity curriculum at IAC University in Nancy, France, and took my daughter with me. Yeah, there's a blog post on pattyj.com I wrote about traveling in Paris.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It's not a tech thing even for once.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Jason, excuse me, you had some stories.
I saw some that were kind of funny, I guess. One that I chuckled over was the hackers automating the laundering of money via Clash of Clans.
That's awesome.
What was interesting about this was the bad guys they steal credit cards, and then to turn that into cash that doesn't disappear on them or whatnot, they go out and use those cards to buy gold on a game like Clash of Clans, right? And then they turn around and resell that gold on a third-party market to players to pick it up, and that makes the cash legitimate. At this point, wouldn't be reversed by a credit card company on them.
That's
or
a great money laundering scheme.
It is. It's better than any other money laundering scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've run into playing MMORPGs and stuff like that. There's always a market for selling stuff like this, and so it was like, oh, look at that. That's kind of funny. It also was kind of funny. They talked about it in the article that what was it? When somebody found this or whatever, it was a MongoDB.
That was just open to the internet.
Yeah, open and unsecured on the internet was a MongoDB sitting out there filled with cards and stuff like that the bad guys are using to store this stuff.
That happens. Davi's probably very upset that happens and working to prevent against that. Knowing Davi.
I didn't think that was funny when I said Mongo. It was like, oh crap, just had Davi on here.
I want to delve into my WTF story of the week. Jack, Jack, are you there? Jack, you paying attention?
Yes. Hey, what?
So, I know you might frequent dating sites. Maybe. Well, Craigslist doesn't have personal ads anymore. Of course, it's a very shady place.
Tinder and Bumble and OkCupid and So anyway, you were saying?
Jack knows about all of them.
Just
now,
farmers.
So a Florida man who's 33.
No,
it's always Florida.
Florida man.
That's all you need to know.
Florida's like the U.S. home of like scams and shady activity like this, right?
An alligator rape.
That too. He posted as a housewife to secretly trick men into letting him perform gay sex acts. Now, what I'm just like floored by in this story, in terms of the social engineering aspect of it, and in all this stuff. They ran a website that allegedly featured straight men being tricked into accepting sex acts from gay men. So they thought they were meeting with women. However, the straight men were blindfolded and wore blacked out goggles and appeared to believe they were with a woman. And then they were filmed and later bribed. And I'm like, so hold on. First of all, why are you going to look for this stuff online? All right. Okay, so people do that, right? But why would you go to some place and then agree to be blindfolded in blackout goggles? Like, how desperate does someone need to
you obviously vastly underestimate the amount of desperation people have.
Right?
Desperate. Yeah. You need to be Florida desperate.
I mean, that just hearing about that creeps me out.
This is barely
let alone like walking through the process of being blindfolded with blackout goggles.
With a person you've never met,
right?
That you got on Craigslist, but you're like, yeah, sure, what the hell, let's do it.
Right. Yeah, like I don't need to know what's going on. Like, just blindfold me.
Barely a step above the hole in the rest stop bathroom stall.
Well, what I understand, the clients are thinking they're meeting with women.
Sure.
Not necessarily men, which is maybe what you typically expect at a rest area. I don't know. You're the expert on this.
Yes, you're with your new glory hole expert, Patrick.
Well, I was wondering why you
just academic research, right?
I was wondering why you started off this discussion by bringing Jack into it. I was wondering where you're going with that.
I have spent a lot of time online having conversations with West African scammers who are pretending to be women, but it was pretty obviously they weren't. It was actually really funny. I got one who, once he discovered I help run hacker cons, I told him I'd give him all sorts of resources if he promised not to try to hack banks. Actually, gave him a bunch of videos to look at. He never followed up, so I assume it's more profitable to prey on old people on OkCupid and Match.com. But, whatever.
I will tell you.
The social engineering of that is a whole interesting thing. And the desperation of people on those dating sites is really pretty depressing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can see it, especially if you're in Florida. I mean, that's just, you're already desperate.
That's God's waiting room.
But rolling people in prostitution situations has been, ancient Romans were getting said, hey man, there's a beautiful woman behind that curtain. Just step back there, and you're gonna all your dreams will come true. And guys are like, yeah, here I have a few drachmas, and it's,
The Godfather, right?
Yeah,
it's a classic scene.
Absolutely, and it's been going on since the dawn of time. So.
This is just like
this is the modern incarnation of it. Yeah,
exactly.
This is just the old, the guy kicks the door in with the woman and says, and chases you off and keeps your wallet.
Now, in other news, thousands of mega logins have been dumped online. And apparently, this one was interesting to me. Obviously, there's data breaches all the time, every week. They turned the data over to Troy Hunt, who basically pointed to credential stuffing. Right, you use one password on one site, it's valid for another site. When Troy got a hold of the mega breach, which is the second incarnation after Kim.com.
Right.
That's your brother, right?
No, it's not my
Paul.com.
There's a history. He actually he changed his name. I got a lot of email after he changed his name. Like, hey, you're going to change your name. No, not going to do that. Legally changed his name to Kim.com. Is still under prosecution for that, and we covered on Hack Naked News his extradition. Is under question right now, and there's a difference in the law. Jason, help me out. What was the difference in the laws? Right, there was
some technicality, and I can't remember.
There was the copyright infringements, which he, I believe, couldn't be extradited under because the country he was
weren't illegal in New Zealand.
They weren't illegal in New Zealand, only in the U.S. So New Zealand was like, no, we're not going to process extradition based on something that's not illegal here in New Zealand, which I thought was interesting from a legal. I'm not a lawyer, but I thought it was interesting. But he's also being charged with fraud, and fraud is something that he could be, Kim.com and others could be extradited for. Right. So he's appealing, but basically they're saying yes, you can be extradited under the fraud charges. So Kim.com and others are still in hot water under the Mega upload. This is Mega, and what Mega, when Troy Hunt got hold of the Mega breach, said 98% of the email addresses had already been in previous breaches. So basically, they're taking previous breaches, trying to apply that to other sites, and having success. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Facebook's not removing fake news, but they're demoting it. Yeah, I don't know. Some can claim free speech, like, hey, you should have free speech. Of course, is free speech really free speech on social media platforms where they get to decide what you say and what you can't? They're not removing what they could deem as fake news. They're just demoting it, which basically takes out 80% of the audience for potential articles. They took flack in this article from journalists that said they allowed, what is the news site?
Holocaust deniers?
No, InfoWars.
InfoWars.
Yeah, they're allowing InfoWars. Jason, did you read the story?
Yeah, I read through it, and I looked at it. And I thought, I thought about the free speech thing. One of the things that I did kind of blink out a little bit with the rationale to have Facebook take this stuff down and police this type of stuff. It's kind of a no-win situation for Facebook because they get into this business and, all of a sudden, here, come to our platform and post stuff, but we're going to decide what you can and can't post. We'll suppress things we don't agree with. And that, I have zero sympathy for InfoWars, but
And Facebook gets in a liability
would,
situation, too, of having to be responsible for researching, evaluating, and assessing content.
They're in a bad situation because
you said it's a no-win.
It is a no-win, and here's why it's a no-win. Because I can take the tobacco aspect of this, right? Like, we have a presence on Facebook for Stogie Geeks. However, Facebook will not let you take out an ad to promote your business if you have anything to do with tobacco. Now, we're not selling tobacco at Stogie Geeks. We're putting on a free show. We're willing to say, if you're not of legal smoking age in your country, state, even county, then you shouldn't be watching this content, right? And we're totally abide by that. Like, you have to be of legal smoking age to view this content. If you're not of legal age of smoking, there's no point in you consuming this content, to be quite
honest. I think that's what they're getting criticized for, is being arbitrary.
Right? So Facebook lets us have a presence, even being a tobacco-related business on Facebook, but tells us you can't take out any advertisements. So therefore, oh yeah, like, we kind of have free speech, but we don't, because we're not treated the same way as a business in a different industry. So you end up hating Facebook, and Facebook tries to appeal to say, well, we're supporting free speech, but the people you're saying you support free speech for, you're limiting their voice. You're not removing it, but you're limiting it. So basically, now you're going to take flack from the anti-tobacco people because you allow us on there. You're going to take flack from the pro-tobacco people because you're limiting what they can do. So basically, you're making everyone hate you.
Yeah.
That's the conclusion I came to in this story.
Where are the Winklevoss twins when you need them?
From personal experience. Yeah, exactly, right? Anyway.
Where's the money? I mean, that's the Facebook angle, is where's the money?
Yeah.
It's a morally, ethically, and politically corrupt organization, which if things were a little different, we could have gotten Davi to go off on that, because he has a pretty epic rant about criminal negligence for a publicly traded company. But I have they're in a really rough situation, and I have no sympathy for them because of the way they've handled a whole bunch of different political, social, and other things, and the way they gutted the security team, and everybody just sort of rolled over and said, sure.
Well, and the political aspect is interesting, Doug, and I think you and I have talked about this. It ties into my story number 7. The Russians who allegedly hacked the DNC mined Bitcoin to fund their operation. Well, of course they did, right? Like, I don't think it's really news or like how they funded it. Every time this comes up, Doug, I think of the conversation that we had where you said, look, anyone running for political office has some type of public relations strategy that includes social media and essentially influencing someone to vote. Now, it's a totally different thing where another nation state tries to influence the vote. Certainly, but everyone who's running for some type of political office also was trying to influence the vote in their favor, and maybe even hiring firms such as Cambridge Analytics to help their political campaign. There's some validity to that. There is a very fine line between, we talked about the ethics in our interview with Davi. I think there's a very interesting ethical debate in this whole thing too.
And I mean, I have a problem with just having outside money targeting different local elections.
Yeah.
So when somebody in Massachusetts starts pouring money into Georgia, trying to influence the election there for whatever reason,
for their for whatever their own personal
agenda I have a personal. I get asked all the time, like, kick in $5 to put this candidate in office in the state of Georgia. And I even if I really wish that the Georgians would vote for that Democratic candidate or whatever, I have a personal problem with it. I'm like, I don't have any business trying to influence people in Georgia on what they should do for dog catcher. If they want the evilest guy, Cruella DeVille, as the dog catcher, they ought to be able to vote for Cruella DeVille as a dog catcher, and not have me sitting up here saying, hey, here's my values. I'm going to pour a whole pile of money into that state trying to hose you. But I mean, it's a mess. But yeah, when it's a foreign nation state, it's definitely a big problem, and I'm not sure exactly what to do with it, because that's a changing sovereignty of the world. We've seen that our world is still defined for most of our legal, governmental, and electoral processes in the basis of, I live between these two rivers and the mountains, and that's my world.
But also, thinking of fake news too, it's really tough to discern what's actually happening. Yeah, in terms of and even with the Russian meddling of the election, So exactly like what happened, how much of the influence, like what's what? Like what is just being fed into the news media? What's fake news? Whose political backing is trying to influence what? Like the problem gets like so wrapped up that like what is
how
really,
do you define it? I mean,
it gets to a point like I don't even want to follow it anymore.
If a Russian troll writes a post and I see it because I subscribe to RussianTroll.com because I'm interested in that, and I forward that post to all my friends, like how on earth do you delineate what that is? So I think instead of us worrying so much about that, we really ought to be worrying more about educating people so that they're discerning. They look at things and make, instead of being stupid and just reading things and being the dumb guard and saying,
you have to look at things through a skeptical lens. And it's interesting. Yeah. I've looked at social media lately, and some of the things that the people that I follow will post more political things. I will kind of question, like really? Like, regardless of your political affiliation, I'm like really? Is that true? Like what?
And I mean, if I see a story that says,
sometimes I get shit for that too, but I'm like, no, like they take politics out of it for a second. Like let's analyze where this data came from. Is it just completely fabricated?
No, I know. I mean, I see a story that says Hillary Clinton is selling children's skins on eBay. I go, that doesn't make any sense, and maybe I'm going to see if that might actually be true before I grab an assault rifle and head off to a warehouse in New Jersey to save the poor children who are being skinned.
I saw one where a Trump supporter wrote in marker on the back of their car and misspelled things. I'm like, okay, so how do you know someone didn't do that purposely? Take a picture, and basically pose as a Trump supporter.
All sides are doing it,
and both sides are doing that.
Both sides.
Now, when it took the 3 minutes to try and validate that, I couldn't find anything. Right, like you're running through TinEye and all that. Like I couldn't validate it easily, which begs the question: how does Facebook and Twitter and now even LinkedIn validate the news? And how do you trust their validation of the news?
And that's the loss of innocence, the Walter Cronkite era where you say, Walter Cronkite comes on the news every night, I trust him, he tells me the truth. And we've moved into the Alex Jones era where a guy comes on and says gay frogs are falling out of the sky.
There's a great documentary on the 90s that talks about the progression of news, reporting on the facts, to a lot of corporate takeovers of news organizations that basically turn them into entertainment outlets and change the message, change the format. Go ahead, Jack.
I was just going to say, if you go back far enough, and Doug and I are probably the only ones who remember this, but growing up, there was a requirement to be equal and provide equal time for if your local news station, even down in Texas, skewed right or left, you had to give equal time. So if you endorsed one candidate, you had to give spare time. And another thing that's changed, Doug, in our lifetime is that you probably remember Tip O'Neill, the famous quote that all politics is local. And that was true at the time. And now, all politics is global.
Yes.
All politics is global. And maybe not dog catcher, but part of the angle that you get on these across state line solicitations is that if you vote for, I won't say names, but if you vote for the person I'm likely to vote for here in one of the congressional races, that puts them in the U.S. Congress or the U.S. Senate. And that has national implications, which we didn't exploit that angle of things earlier. But it's part of the 24-hour news cycle. It's part of politicization and commercialization of news. It's as I've said many times in the past few years. Luckily, I'm old and I'll be dead before long, and most of the listeners will have to suffer through this for decades longer than I will.
Yeah, I forget who ran the documentary, but they talked about the famous cases in the 90s and kind of how that flipped into the Rodney King beatings and what were some of the other big news stories in the 90s? All those big news stories. OJ, thank you, the OJ trial, right? How all that was sensationalized for the first time, that there were cameras in the courtroom. It was being transmitted in real time. And it was the first time that happened, and that's when it kind of flipped into this more news as entertainment rather than the news actually being the news.
But this is also getting worse with the loss of local news. that people don't have local news to pay attention to
They
anymore.
read Facebook for their news.
They do.
God help us all.
If they don't want to listen to the big national MSNBC, Fox, CNN kind of thing, well, then they do go and just kind of read what their cousin's brother's uncle wrote on Facebook as being, the truth.
And even I feel like the local news isn't telling both sides of the local story.
No, they're not.
No.
Awful stories that I'm close to. I'm like,
my daughter was just commenting. She was visiting some relatives in a red state, and she was commenting about what the news was like and what the commercials were like, and how it was so weird because she'd never seen anything like that. It was so biased, and it was just like so different from what she sees in Rhode Island. And I was like, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I had that same experience 2 weeks in Singapore watching the nightly news and how they covered the United States. It's like, holy cow, that's different.
Yeah, very,
very. Anyway, speaking of news, that rounds out our news. Hopefully we bring the facts here to Security Weekly without bias. It's always been our goal.
Right, yeah.
In
no
the
bias
segment, at least with no political
empathy and non-bias. That's
affiliation, certainly.
No one will be offended.
Just dumb guards.
Thank you to everyone for participating in this segment.
I'm getting shot tonight, aren't I?
Dog at securityweekly.com. Thank you for everyone for listening and watching to this edition of Paul Security Weekly. We'll see you next time.